He seemed just as reluctant to let me go on my way during lunch as I had been to leave. Thinking about lunch made my stomach growl hungrily though, and I patted it a little guiltily. I wasn't watching where I was going exactly because suddenly I slammed into something solid and I knew it wasn't a wall. Whatever it was had just moved into my path. "Hello there, sweetheart. It's nice seeing you again," said a suave voice. One that sends shivers down my spine. "Fort." I stepped back immediately, bringing my books up in front of me protectively. "Get lost. I don't want anything to do with you." My voice contained so much venom that I was surprised he didn't flinch. Jennifer stood right beside him, one hand on his arm as she smiled evilly at me. "Don't talk to him like that, you little slut." Fort cast her a sideways glance that told me he wanted her to shut up and get away from him. He wasn't interested in her. It was me he had his eyes set on. He stepped in closer just to prove it, backing me into a wall. "We had fun, didn't we? Let's hook up again tonight?" he said, one hand reaching out to touch me. I slapped it away as hard as I could and he hissed angrily. Jennifer seemed not to have heard his last words because she pushed in beside me and said, "You're such an idiot, you can't even satisfy one man." "Good thing I was around, isn't that right, baby?" She ran her hands up his arm and pressed herself against him a little now. Fort responded a little distracted, his eyes still focused tightly on me, although he was running them up and down my body. "Those clothes don't suit you at all," he said. Jennifer nodded in agreement, but I knew Fort meant he wanted me to wear something more revealing, whereas Jennifer just thought any clothes I wore looked ugly on me. "Come on, hun, we're gonna be late for class if we don't leave now," Jennifer cooed. Fort was nodding and smiled at my stepsister. "Let's ditch class. Go, I'll meet you at your car." He wiggled his eyes suggestively at her. She squealed and immediately started walking, leaving me more or less alone with Fort. She was so stupid. He turned to me again as soon as she was out of sight and prevented me from sneaking away. "You can run, but you can't hide Brittany," he said, his voice low as he backed me into the wall again. Something in his eyes looked a lot like a caged animal. It was trying to claw its way out. "You're going to be mine soon enough." His hand came up to wrap around my throat, rubbing the bare skin there roughly. I swallowed nervously, readying my leg to kick him again. Panic was surging through me as I remembered Friday evening, immobilizing me. Fort was suddenly pulled away from me and a low and angry voice said, "What do you think you're doing?" The voice sounded so angry, in fact, that it was nearly a growl. The impact it had on Fort was very satisfying. He whirled around, his shoulders slumped, and he shook his head. "Nothing, Mr. Clitton. I'm going to class now." His voice was very demure, but as he all but ran away, he cast one look over his shoulder, hate-filled. Alexander didn't seem to be impressed in the least as he watched the guy leave, his shoulders shaking with suppressed rage. Then he turned around to look at me. "Are you all right, Brittany?" I nodded, but at the use of my full name, I realized the hallway was anything but deserted. Students, mostly from the biology class, were all staring. I shivered and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Clitton, thank you." We all filed into the classroom and I hurried to the back, glad that I could sit down because my legs felt a little wobbly. So I had been mistaken. Just a hug, albeit a long one, wasn't enough to make me strong enough to face anything for the rest of the day. It was of course silly of me to forget that he attended school here as well, and that I didn't have the chance to run into him. But I really had forgotten with all the worrying about Danis and the fact that my father had been home this weekend. Alexander started class, handing out assignments. His voice sounded normal to anyone but the most observant. To me, he still sounded angry. But when I met his stormy eyes, I felt a wave of love and concern wash over me. I nodded slowly, breathing in deeply to show him I was fine. During the entire lesson, he kept walking around the room, from person to person as he explained and helped people. Every time he was near me, he'd brush his fingers across exposed skin on my arm, and twice even across the back of my neck. It helped to keep my mind of things. Well, bad things at least. By the end of class, I was thinking mostly about him again, and that tension was back, differently. It wasn't as heavily there as that morning, but it still made my skin tingle. When Alexander at last dismissed the class, he reminded me loudly that I did have a detention again. I hadn't moved anyway, but I guessed he said it for the benefit of the other students, so that they knew I had a legit reason to stay behind. When the last one was out the door, he held up a hand. "Stay here. I'll be right back, okay?" He was out the door before I could reply. With a shrug, I pulled out my homework and started on that, only a little disappointed that he hadn't come over to hold me again. I was really confused now. I knew I wanted to be with him. The way he made me feel said enough, despite what I had been thinking before. I had found myself falling harder for him every time I saw him. But it just wasn't clear to me what he felt and wanted from me. Did he feel like I did? Did he really think being with me was worth risking losing his job? Or was he still just being nice because I was friends with his sister? A package was dropped in front of me. Here, you must be hungry. You missed lunch because of me. I looked up to find Alexander standing in front of me, leaning forward on my desk to peer into my face. He was smiling and nodded encouragingly at the food in front of me. It was just a simple sandwich and a bottle of orange juice. I dug in hungrily. It tasted absolutely amazing, and was nearly done when I realized he had missed lunch too. Oh, I blushed madly at him and he grinned. I already ate a girl motroy. I finished the last bit hurriedly and took a few sips of the drink before bending back over my homework. I had just stuffed myself like a pig in front of him. How embarrassing. As if he read my mind though, he said, I should not have kept you from your lunch. You were very hungry. I forget sometimes. You need more food than I do. He sounded genuinely remorseful, as if he had done something horrible. He had moved back a little to sit down on the edge of the desk in front of mine, and as I looked up, his stormy gray eyes were focused intently on my face. Tell me about yourself, he demanded then. What? I stuttered out, surprised by the request. I want to get to know you. Will you tell me about yourself? He asked gently. A soft smile was curving his lips, and I wanted nothing more than to kiss them. Blushing again, I shrugged. What do you want to know? Everything, he replied. The look in his eyes told me he was deadly serious. He really wanted to know everything about me. Well, I have a little brother that I absolutely love to death, I told him honestly. Thinking about Andy made me a little sad again, and I could tell he noticed because he hurried to say, Is he well? I nodded, and then I did something I didn't expect at all. The urge to tell him everything was just too strong. The words rolled from my lips on their own accord. He's as well as can be. He misses Mom a lot, and our old home. Nothing is the same anymore now that we live with my dad. Stephanie, our stepmother, has no time for him whatsoever, and the nanny is really firm with him. He has so much trouble adjusting. He's really shy around strangers, you know. He doesn't make friends easily. He's always worrying about me too, because Jennifer always gets me in trouble. This morning he was crying, and not even reminding him about our dreams could cheer him up. I took a deep breath and realized that tears had formed in my eyes, forcing their way out. Alexander was already on my side of the desk, pulling me swiftly into his embrace. He didn't say anything as he held me. After a while, he pushed me back a little to look at my face. What would you wish to happen? To make him happy? Can you go back to your mother? I shook my head. Our mom's dead. She got really sick one day, pneumonia. Alexander changed his hold on me, so that one arm was tightly wrapped around my waist while the other softly stroked my hair. His eyes were filled with compassion, but he didn't say anything like the hated words, I'm sorry. Instead, he said, Then what would you like to happen? I guess you would like to leave your father's home? Meeting his eyes, I nodded. Yes. He doesn't like either of us anyway. No one seems to like us. I wish I could just take Andy with me and raise him myself. He deserves a good home where he feels safe and loved. And so do you, Britt? Alexander added. I heard a scraping sound, and then suddenly Alexander was sitting down, pulling me with him into his lap. Now, let's talk about lighter things, shall we? He murmured into my hair. It felt so amazing how I fit right in there, with my head tucked underneath his chin and his arms around me. The hard planes of his chest felt soft and warm as I leaned into him. The rest of the hour flew by as Alexander asked me question after question about my likes and dislikes. But he didn't mind when I started asking him my own questions. Sometimes, it felt like I already knew the answer to a question before he replied. I had just known, for example, that his favorite color was topaz before he even said so, although it still made me blush when he explained that was because it was the color of my eyes. He was such a charmer. At exactly 5 p.m., he unfurled his arms and helped me get up. He gracefully flowed to his feet and smiled. Seems like it's time to go home. I nodded and frowned at myself for feeling so sad about that fact. I would get to see him again tomorrow. Besides, I really needed to spend time with Andy and cheer him up. I had to show him I wasn't going to give up. Alexander followed me out of school, a comfortable silence stretching around us. The school was deserted, and so was the parking lot. Obviously, everyone already left. No wonder he hadn't been worried about anyone walking in on us. I stared a little morosely at the empty parking lot, knowing Jennifer had left without me and that I'd have to walk home. Dennis had, after all, quit his job, so I couldn't expect him to come and pick me up. Alexander followed my look and smirked suddenly. Seems like I get to take you home, Grandma Croy? He took hold of my hand and tugged me towards his flashy red car. I couldn't help but feel a little happy about that. It meant more time together with him. The car ride was quiet, and I found myself thinking about us's again. Did he really feel the same about me as I did about him? The way he acted really showed that he didn't care. He could lose his job if it was found out. Alexander? I asked, determined suddenly to find out where we were standing at. I didn't want to go home and worry about it all night. Yes, agramo quoi? He replied, raising an eyebrow to show me he wanted to know what was on my mind. What, eh? Where? What's going on between us? I cringed when I said us. Because it implied there was an us, and I didn't know that, it was what I was trying to find out. Alexander stared at me for a moment and then said seriously, I'm sorry, Agramo Croy. I've been going about this all backwards. I felt my heart sink to the pit of my stomach. See? There was no us, he was just being a good friend, like his siblings. But what about that kiss then? Blushing and feeling hurt and upset even though it wasn't his fault, but my own stupid mind that had fooled myself. I turned away to look out the window, hoping the rest of the ride wouldn't be awkward now that I had ruined things. Flit? He took one hand of the wheel and gently folded it around mine. I want to be with you, he said. My eyes automatically shot to his face, thinking that I must have heard him wrong or that he was joking. There was just no way this insanely handsome man, at least 5 years older than me, would want to be with me. I want to be with you, Brittany, he repeated, smiling softly at the disbelief on my face. Would you go out with me on a date? Wednesday, perhaps? A little numb, I nodded my head. Yes! My voice sounded breathless, and I mentally scolded myself for sounding like such a dumb, love-struck ninny all of a sudden. He suddenly brought my hand up and pressed a kiss on the top, like an old-fashioned gentleman. His lips were soft, and I could only just suppress a shiver of delight. We have arrived at Agramo Croy, he said, letting go of my hand. I wrenched my eyes away from him to see that he'd parked his car right in front of the big empty house. I took a deep breath, savoring his scent before opening the door. Be strong, but call me if you need anything at all, he said, and I nodded. Squaring my shoulders, I marched up to the front door. I had to knock because my keys were still in that bag at the Clitton residence. The maid opened and she smiled at me. That was a good sign, probably. Turning, I watched Alexander drive away, ignoring the strange pulling feeling on my heart. Stephanie was apparently gone, out with friends according to the maid, but the rolling of her eyes told me she didn't believe that. Jennifer was out too, on a date with some guy probably, or maybe hanging out with her new besties. Since my father had left this morning again for work, it meant I had the house pretty much to myself with Andy. Good, time to do some major cheering up then. I went to Halbaz. Bropt off bra. Being full definitely seemed to help, if only a little. I wondered how Bob had known that fact. He hadn't met his soulmate yet. Although Bob never talked much about those first 10 years he'd been a vampire, neither Sarah or I had been there by his side then. When I got home, Sarah and Dennis had finally decided to be social, it seemed. Or maybe they were simply downstairs because Dennis's body was definitely human and he needed sustenance. Evening, Mr. Clitton, the guy said hesitantly, and I growled in annoyance. So now you suddenly remember your manners, do you? I said. I could still vividly remember that afternoon when he'd openly defied me, touching MY Brit while staring me down. Pity Sarah had already been in the car and hadn't seen him at that time. Dennis visibly shrunk into himself, but he bravely said, I'm sorry, I did not mean to offend you in any way, and I will do anything to get your approval. Sarah is the most amazing girl I've ever laid eyes on. Sarah, who was sitting beside him, smiled widely at his words and then returned to glaring at me. I shook my head a little confused, and then laughed as realization dawned on me. I'm fine with you and Sarah being together, you're soulmates. I know you would never do anything to harm her. Relief flashed across the young witch's features. Despite his brave words, it was obvious he didn't want to fight me. He knew he'd lose. His magic wasn't enough to do serious damage to me, and the spells that could took too long to be useful in an open fight. I'm referring to that day in the parking lot, Danis. When you defied me and touched my mate, I explained, but I didn't feel angry about that anymore. I was just grumpy because I was still yearning so strongly to go to Britt. It was hard focusing on anything other than the link between her mind and mine. After today, it seemed to have gotten much stronger again. I suspected strong enough even for Britt to realize the connection was there. Danis, Sarah exclaimed, slapping his shoulder playfully. You flirted with Brittany? The blonde-haired witch looked a lot like a little angel, a cherub. Although his body was all hard planes and angles, showing clearly that he was a man and not a boy. He shook his blonde curls from his eyes and said, Brittany needed a friend. That family of hers is horrible. They're all so mean to her, she gets the blame of everything. I nodded. Sarah, that stepsister doesn't want to be seen with her. She makes her walk to and from school if she's even a second too late. I want you to pick her up tomorrow morning as her friend. It's not weird if you do that, right? I left the unspoken words hanging. I would be glad to do it, but as her teacher, people were bound to notice, and we didn't want that. I knew I'd told Britt several times that I didn't care about the job, but I did want to keep it if that was possible. I preferred being able to see her in school and keep an eye on her there. Not just Fort seemed interested in her. Nearly all the supernatural students at the school paid extra attention to her. I wasn't very strongly telepathic, not like Sarah, but I had still picked up quite a lot of thoughts that I didn't want to hear. The boys at school, mostly the wolves, had no clue how close they'd come each day to me ripping their throats out. Everyone knew that I did not share. But as long as Britt wasn't marked as mine, they didn't know I had claimed her. I sighed. Maybe I should let the entire supernatural community know. Calling a meeting might not be a bad idea. No, I don't think that would help Alex, and of course I'll drive her to school from now on. Now that Danis isn't doing it anymore, that's a great idea. Sarah was reading my mind, of course. Why? A meeting to tell everyone she's mine would at least keep the kids at school in check. Fort was bothering her again in the hallway today. Which reminds me, I need to call Thomas and tell him he's gone soft. He promised me this would stop. Danis shivered, obviously not used to the easy way I talked about the supernatural community. I was, if not their leader, I let the elders run the town, definitely able to demand pretty much everything I wanted. Thomas is out of town on business. Alexander, that's probably why Ford is running wild like that. He thinks he can get away with things when the alpha's not around. Bloody Kid is bullying a lot of the young witches as well. He calls us inferior. At the last words, Danis spat angrily and then buried himself in the plate of mac and cheese, embarrassed by his outburst. I see, so he hasn't been punished yet. I nodded. That made sense, although it pissed me off that Thomas had refrained from telling me he was away when I was on the phone with him. I can tell Britt is nearly ready to accept you, Alex. She said yes when you asked her on a date, didn't she? That's why you should wait with a meeting. She's smart and sensitive. She would notice if half the student body started treating her differently all of a sudden. Besides, I think she'd appreciate it if you introduced her properly instead of going behind her back. She's stubborn. You know, she'd be pissed if you did that. Sarah shared some of her insights, and I couldn't disagree. Britt was stubborn, all right. It's what had kept her upright these past 3 years since she started living with her dad. It's why she was still alive and kicking even though she had to care for her little brother and love him like a mother and father. I really wished I could just take the both of them away from that house. They could live here without a problem. Enough space and money. No lack of people to love the both of them either. With a smirk towards Sarah, I thought, Sarah would just love to have a little brother to look after. Showing me she'd heard the thought, Sarah started to smile. It might not be a bad idea to look into the legal aspect of that, Alex, so that when the time is right, we can pluck them both away. I doubt she'll move in if she can't take her brother with her. Danis groaned. You know how confusing it is to hear only one half of a conversation? I'm no mind reader like you, miss. But you're right. Brittany would never leave that house without Andy. We talked a while longer, planning what to do with Fort and with Brittany and Andy. We needed a plan. After a while, Sarah started on the topic of the date and started planning that, leaving me with little input and nothing to do. When at long last we all got up to go to bed, it was nearly midnight. There was just one question remaining. Danis, when are you moving in completely? Or are you moving out, Sarah? Would not be so bad if she moved out. Meant I wouldn't have to hear them have sex. Sarah, having heard the thought, laughed, but Danis replied, "Eh? You are okay with me moving in?" "Of course. Why wouldn't I be? If your grandmother is okay with it, then so am I." His grandmother was the crone of the village. It sounded disrespectful to me to call a pleasant old lady crone, but for witches, that was a title of honor. It meant she was the leader. "My grandmother is very happy for me. She can't wait to meet you, Sarah," Danis said, turning himself towards Sarah to explain what his grandmother had said and done. I left them and wished Bob good night as I passed him watching TV. It appeared to be some kind of show about vampires. He found those greatly amusing. They were so unrealistic that it was funny. When I crashed in bed, I touched my mind gently to Britt. She was sleeping already. Her dreams were restless, though, filled with worries about her baby brother and, surprisingly, about me abandoning her. I filled her mind with comforting thoughts about how I loved her and would always protect her. It wasn't hard to paint a picture in her dreams where both she and Andy lived in my house with Bob, Sarah, Danis, and me. She accepted the image as her own. It was close to what she wanted herself. After that, I turned around and fell asleep myself, hoping that tomorrow would bring me another step closer to winning her heart. Heya, I'm back from Norway and ready to continue this story. Happy New Year, everyone. Vote and comment, please. I would really like some feedback. Tuesday seemed uneventful compared to Monday, right until the very end, but I liked it that way. Sarah picked me up and drove me to school in the morning, much to Jennifer's chagrin, but she couldn't say anything about it. During third period, I smiled at Alexander the moment I saw him, and as he passed out sheets with information, he brushed my hand. It took the edge of the burning need to go to him and kiss him senseless to hell with the fact that everyone could see us. Jennifer was extremely forward in her way of flirting this class, tugging her shirt lower and her skirt up to reveal more leg. I wondered if guys really thought that was attractive. To me, it just seemed cheap. It was amusing to watch, though, even if it was a little disgusting occasionally. But I knew Alexander wasn't interested in her at all. After all, it was me he'd asked out on a date. I did not get a detention that day, and I was almost sad about it. It meant I wouldn't be spending another hour with Alexander, and that he wouldn't be the one to take me home. On the other hand, Sarah invited herself over, so today would still be fun. I was the last to leave when the final bell rang, being extremely slow about packing my bag so it wouldn't seem suspicious to the other students. When I was finally done, I looked up to see that Alexander was standing right in front of the door. He cast me one look, questioningly, with one of those eyebrows raised. I slowly made my way over to him, and feeling brave, I reached past him and pulled the door shut. He was chuckling, and I felt my face heating up, but at least he took my bag from me, dropping it to the floor with a heavy thud. Then, without saying a word, he pulled me into his arms, tucking my head under his chin. I shivered, again experiencing that sensation of an elastic band that had been under constant strain finally relaxing. Melting into him, I wrapped my arms around him tightly, ignoring the dirty thoughts that came unbidden. He was running gentle fingers up and down my back in patterns, his breath flitting down my heated cheeks to tickle the sensitive skin just underneath my ears. I wondered what it would feel like if he kissed me there. A groan escaped his lips, and he muttered, "You're going to be the death of me, a gramo croye." I felt more than heard the sensual promise in his voice as he pressed me up against the door. I heard the key turn as he locked it, my heart thudding loudly in my chest and my skin on fire, all of it seeming to run in a direct line to the center of my body. One of his hands was on my hip, the lower half of his body pressing into me. The other hand slid up my arm, across the soft skin of my throat, and then pulled my chin up so he could look me in the eye. His normally stormy eyes were so dark they were nearly black, the air around us practically shimmering with the repressed sexual tension. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. He was breathing fast, and I realized that I was too. My own hands were splayed out across his chest, only barely keeping my breast from touching the hard planes of muscle. I sighed, my breath flitting across his lips, and that's exactly when I felt something snap inside of me. I wanted him more than anything, and I just knew it was right. The rules were wrong. They couldn't keep us apart. It didn't matter. The connection between us was so clear that I could almost hear his thoughts. He was practically screaming in his mind, "Mine! She's mine. I love her. Kiss her. Kiss me, Britt." The sentences all short and jumbled as if the circuits inside were overheated, and he wasn't thinking rational anymore. I didn't care because I felt the same. I closed the distance between our lips. Electric sparked and fire burned. I felt like floating as his lips molded against mine. He moaned as I reached a hand up to tug on his hair, pulling him closer if that was even possible. I felt a very strong sense of satisfaction at being the one that had made him moan. Good. It was an amazing sound. It made things tighten low in my body. He was running one hand through my hair, the other one slid down to cut my bottom, lifting me effortlessly off the floor. I wrapped my legs around his waist, letting out my own moan at the feel of him hard and hot against me. I realized my fingers were trying to undo the buttons on his shirt, and that's when I stopped. Wow. I was trying to undress Alexander. I was trying to undress my teacher. His lips came away from mine, but he didn't seem to notice I wasn't kissing him back anymore. He attached his mouth to my throat, and as if he'd heard my earlier thought, kissed right to that sensitive spot just below my ear. Another moan escaped my throat, and my back arched as a hot wave of pleasure washed over me. Our lower regions connecting, creating a short moment of friction. It brought on another moan that I just couldn't hold in. I felt heat rush to my cheeks, suddenly feeling embarrassed, and that did stop him. He didn't let go, didn't even alter his position in the least. One warm hand possessive on my butt. The evidence of his obvious arousal pressed against the V between my legs, his forehead resting against mine. We were both panting. Agramokroe. No, don't be embarrassed. His voice was husky, filled with lust that was nowhere near satisfied, but his eyes had turned to a lighter shade again. He pressed himself closer, and that caused another wave of pleasure to shoot through my body. He was rubbing against me in such a way. I knew he'd seen it on my face because he did it a second time, and then smirked in male satisfaction at the moan rolling off my lips. I very much love that sound, he whispered hotly, pressing against me again just to hear me moan. Alexander, his name, fell from my lips, and I was shocked to hear how unsteady my own voice sounded. I sounded like sex, I thought, and that made me blush again. I love it when you say my name like that, Alexander said, again that male satisfaction filling his voice. He ran one hand up my side and then pulled away, allowing me to drop my unsteady legs to the floor. Sarah is waiting, he said with a roll of his eyes. Reaching behind me, he unlocked the door, freeing me to go home and leave him. I was still leaning against the door, not trusting myself to stand up fully after that onslaught on my senses. I was still reeling from his hot kiss, and there was something hot pooled low in my body that craved release. I knew what kind, and I shivered. Dirty thoughts after a very dirty moment. Just looking at Alexander, I could still see how aroused he was, but he seemed collected as he stepped away from me to lean against his desk. Bloody man? I was going to be the death of him? How about the other way around? He was smirking, as if he'd heard that, and I surprised myself by half growling. No reading my mind. Amusement sparkled in his eyes, and he nodded. Fine, I won't do it again, agramokroe, but only if I get to kiss you like this more often? Deal? Was he mocking me now? Yet I nodded. Deal. It felt like I'd just done something irreversible. There was no going back now. I had officially broken the rules now by making out with my teacher. I felt relieved somehow. Britt, you should go now. Sarah is waiting, and she's starting to get impatient, Alexander said. His voice was still husky, but it contained much of his amusement too. I frowned. How do you know? I can read minds, remember? He said, chuckling, as if he'd said something very funny. Are you making fun of me now? I couldn't keep a little of the hurt out of my voice. How could he? After we just kissed. It was more than that, way more, but I couldn't quite make myself think about it. He smiled. Of course not, agramokroe. I would never make fun of you. It was a joke. I felt a soft touch on my mind, a caress. It was filled with warmth and love and acceptance. I just couldn't feel upset anymore. All right, I'll see you tomorrow, Alexander, I offered as I picked up my bag from the floor where he'd dropped it. Just before I opened the door and left, I felt his body heat right behind me, a soft touch of his fingertips underneath my chin. He tilted my head up to meet his eyes. Take care, Brittany. He brushed his lips against mine softly, barely touching, and then he stepped back again. As I walked through the empty hallways, my hand strayed to my lips. They felt hot and a little bruised, It felt absolutely delicious. Sarah was indeed fidgeting impatiently as she stood, leaned against her own shiny silver car. Finally, you took your own sweet time saying goodbye, but she sounded more amused now, then angry at having to wait. I blushed at her and hurried to get into the car, hoping she wouldn't notice. So, Sarah chirped, are you two an item now? I stared at my friend for a moment, then hurried to look at the window as we peeled away from the parking lot. I could just see Alexander leaving the building and walking to his own car. He was smiling and waved once in my direction. Well, are you? Sarah insisted when I didn't reply. I don't know. We just kissed, I told her, blushing furiously. I hid my face by looking out the window intently, even though I could no longer see Alexander. I find that hard to believe. You have a hickey on your neck, Brittany. That doesn't happen if you just kiss. She was shaking with repressed laughter for some reason. Mortified, I clasped my hand over the spot below my ear. That bastard. Why did he do that? How was I supposed to hide that from Jennifer and Stephanie? He very much wants to make you his. My brother is very possessive when it comes to girlfriends, Sarah said as if reading my mind. Although it was probably clearly written on my face. Girlfriend? I asked. Or more like sweet. Was I his girlfriend now? Yeah, he doesn't date much, you know. But when he does, he really cares about you, honey, Sarah explained. And don't worry, I can cover up that mark. No problem, no one at your home will notice. She winked at me. God, that girl really could read minds or something, just like her brother. At least of the three of them, Bob seemed somewhat normal. Sarah snorted inelegantly but said nothing. When we arrived at my house, she pulled out a bag of makeup from under the driver's seat. Adeptly, she dusted something on my neck with cool, certain fingers. She clicked a few times with her tongue, but pretty soon she said, "All done, no one will notice." At least I didn't have to wonder about why he seemed so bloody satisfied. He marked me for the whole world to see. At least it would fade in a few days. I'd just have to wear a high collar tomorrow. Oh, before we forget, I got your overnight bag with you. The one you forgot on Saturday? Sarah tugged it out from behind her seat and deposited it in my lap. Great, my keys were in there. I thanked her as I led her to the front door. As I ushered her inside the big house, I drew in a relieved breath when I noticed that again, neither Stephanie or Jennifer were there. Come on, let me introduce you to Andy. The day seemed to fly by, and surprisingly, Andy seemed not the least bit shy around Sarah. Of course, I understood that a little. Sarah had that way of making you feel comfortable. She always seemed to know exactly what to say to ease your mind. I kept thinking about Alexander. It was impossible not to, really. The memory of his hands on my skin, or his lips. Every time I thought about that, I would start tingling, and I couldn't refrain from reaching up to touch that hickey. It really was a good thing Sarah knew how to cover it up. If Stephanie or Jennifer found out, they'd probably give me hell about it. I was just a little pissed at Alexander for doing that. I didn't mind the mark. In fact, I found it rather exciting that he'd wanted to mark me his apparently. But, did he have to do it in such a visible spot? I could already hear him argue that it wasn't a proper mark if nobody could see it. After all, it was meant to show the world I was taken. Was I really taken, though? Was I his girlfriend now? We hadn't even gone out on a proper date. All this marking me. His stuff was rather weird anyway. We were supposed to keep this secret. He would lose his job if the school knew we were dating. Sarah did a good job cheering Andy up even more. She invited him over to her house to come play with the video games Bob had. She assured us both that Bob would love to show them to him. I wasn't too sure about that, but hey, it was her neck, not mine. Of course it meant Andy wanted to go over to the Clitton house first thing tomorrow, which wasn't possible. But Sarah promised him he was welcome anytime. She was even going to make a room for him so he could sleep over if he wanted. I thought that was a little too much, but Sarah cast me a look that said, "Don't disagree with me. I'm saying this for a reason." I was dying to ask her what the hell she thought she was doing, but didn't get the chance till after dinner. Stephanie was surprisingly nice to Sarah. Jennifer wasn't there though. She was out on another date. It was nearly 10 p.m., and at long last we'd managed to get Andy to go to sleep. He was so hyper about making a friend, even though she was 10 years older, that he didn't want to go to sleep until she'd left. He refused, even though we'd read him 2 bedtime stories together, so at long last I offered to sing him a lullaby. He wanted Sarah to do that, but she'd laughed, saying, "Sorry, kid, I can't sing for the life of me." But I'm sure Brittany is really good. Let's both lie down and listen, Kay? And then Sarah had gracefully lain down beside my baby brother and pretended to fall asleep. Satisfied, Andy had then curled up into my side, demanding I sing that lullaby. I didn't know that many, and I had to think deep and hard. Surprisingly, the song I sang for him was the same one Alexander had sang for me. I didn't know I remembered it that well, but as I started humming the melody, the words found their way to my lips, and soon I was singing. I knew that Sarah had twitched in surprise and then stared at me with open mouth, but I'd chosen to ignore it. Andy was out like a light in 1 minute flat. That had to be a record. Back in my own room, I beat Sarah to it by springing my own question on her, before she could ask me about the lullaby. I knew it was a familiar song to her after all. Alexander said their mother sung that for them when they were little. Why the hell would you tell him you're making a room for him? I seriously doubt Stephanie or my dad will let him sleep over. It'll just disappoint him. Sarah sighed and plopped down on my bed, looking around my room curiously and noting that despite the fact that I had unpacked everything, the room still looked bare. I told him that because I want him to get used to the idea that there's another house out there for him to call home. He's always welcome, and so are you, she said at long last. I stared at her for a moment. I really appreciate that, miss, but, she interrupted me. I know you want to get away from here, Brittany. We just need to figure out how you can take Andy with you when you leave. There has to be a way to convince a judge that you should be his legal guardian, not that shitty stepmom or your dad who's never around. Sarah? I said, feeling moved. Are you saying that if we find a way? I couldn't utter the words, my throat closing up. Did she really just say that me and Hay were welcome to live with them? At the Clitton house? I talked about it with Alexander Brittany. It was sort of his idea, actually. The house is big enough, even with Dennis moving in, and you'd hardly cost a thing anyway. It's just the legal aspect. He's looking into it with Dennis as we speak, probably. Suddenly, I was bawling my eyes out, glad that Sarah didn't hesitate to pull me into a tight embrace. That's so nice of you. All of you, I hiccuped through my tears. Sarah was patting my back as I cried. It's what best friends and lovers are for, hun, she said. Alexander wanted me and Hay both to live at his house? I couldn't believe it. These people, even though I'd known them for such a short while, had already succeeded in making me feel so much less alone. They'd make me feel welcome and loved, and they didn't hesitate to include Andy into all of this. After a while, I pulled back and still sniffling. I smiled at Sarah. Now, what was this about Dennis moving in? I had never seen Sarah blush before, but she came damn close to it now. She looked away from me and hid her face behind a curtain of hair. Seriously, miss, I know he's cute. And all but first time you saw him, you went and stuck your tongue down his throat. Shut up! It wasn't like that, my friend exclaimed, and then she giggled. He's just so… God, I'm just so in love, Britt. The moment I laid eyes on him, I just knew. He's the one, and the best part is, he knew it too. I smiled and hugged her again. Before I'd met Alexander, I wouldn't have believed in love at first sight. But now, a knock on the door and then Stephanie's voice. Sarah, dear, shouldn't you be on your way home? Your parents must be expecting you by now. Sarah cast me a look, then yelled back sweetly, Oh heavens, I didn't know it was this late already. Thank you for the reminder, Mrs. Washer. She stood up gracefully from the bed and gave me another hug. I'll see you tomorrow at school. Don't forget to pack another overnight bag, just in case, and your fancy clothes so I can help you prepare for the date. I promised I wouldn't forget. She was almost out the door when she spun around. Where did you learn that lullaby? Her expression was confused. I shrugged. Alexander sung it to me a few times. I guess I picked it up from him. Didn't realize I knew all the words until I sang it tonight. Sarah nodded. You're lucky. He never sings for me, not even when I have nightmares. I winked. You have Dennis to do that now. Night, Brittany. With that, she was out the door, dancing down the stairs, light as a feather as always. I prepared my bag and then got ready for bed. Before I turned off the light, I grabbed my phone. I had several new messages. 3 from Dennis, telling me to tell Sarah to get home because he missed her. I hadn't expected the guy to be so clingy. 1 was from Alexander, and my heart literally skipped a beat when I read it. You can sing me to sleep tomorrow if you'd like. You are always welcome at my home, both of you. And don't cover up the hickey, a gramokoi. How had he known I'd been singing a lullaby? Had Sarah told him already? But as I checked the time on the text messages, I saw that he'd sent it just a few minutes after Andy had fallen asleep. It was eerie. Damn, man really seemed to be able to read minds, even over such a distance. Of course that was ridiculous. Still, I didn't reply to his message, but furiously thought, "You're going to pay for that hickey, Mr. Clitton." Oh, and the deal is off. If he really could read minds, and he had been, then he'd know. I was sure he knew. I had a feeling he was laughing so hard right now that he'd fallen right out of his bed. I could only too vividly imagine Bob barging into his room to check if everything was all right. That image only a little distorted by the strange banging and moaning sound I heard in the background. I shivered and dispelled the image. I was really going insane. But just like last night, right before I drifted off to sleep, thinking pleasant thoughts of Alexander and me together, I felt that touch on my mind, soft and gentle as always. A caress that eased any last worries and pulled me into sleep, guiding me into pleasant dreams. Wednesday morning, it was Janice and Sarah together who picked me up. Jennifer saw and she scowled, but she said nothing. As I dropped my overnight bag on the back seat beside me, Janice winked at me through the mirror. "I thought I'd drive, so I can take that bag straight home." "How are you, Brittany?" "I'm all right, Janice. You?" He smirked, and then cast a look at Sarah, who was fiddling with her makeup bag. "I've never been so happy in my life. I never thought it would happen to me, but..." He shrugged his shoulders. "I'm glad it did." When we arrived at school, Sarah turned around in her seat. "Come on, I'll work my magic on that hickey again. That way you don't have to wear that shirt. Must be really hot." I nodded in relief, but just as I was about to pull down the collar of the turtleneck shirt I was wearing, Jennifer sauntered into sight. She was fast approaching the car. What was she up to? Sarah saw my look and nodded. "I'll do it during lunch in the bathroom." "Come on, Brittany." Then the girl climbed out of the car after kissing Janice. Jennifer watched us walk into school, a curious look on her face that told me she wasn't going to let this be. Obviously, she thought I was up to something and she was determined to find out what, and if she couldn't find out, she'd just make sure I was in so much trouble I couldn't do it anyway. During first period, Mr. Cooks, our grizzled teacher, kept casting me curious looks. It was almost as if he could see the hickey on my neck straight through the fabric of my shirt. Already I felt extremely warm and uncomfortable. Sarah cast me a mischievous look when she said goodbye to me in the hall, but no nasty surprises awaited me during second period. Bob didn't talk much as was usual, but he cast me a warm look. Jennifer, on the other hand, stirred her minions up into a frenzy, so that they all started taunting me with the too warm shirt. It was annoying, more than anything, but still, I was rather frustrated by the end of the period. I stalked all the way to third, where I planned on giving Alexander a piece of my mind. Of course, when I got there, I realized I couldn't very well do that with the entire classroom present. I sat down in the back next to Sarah, glowering at him and glaring every time he turned to smirk at me. The exchange didn't go unnoticed to the rest of the class, especially not to Jennifer. It wasn't fair that for a stereotyped slutty blonde bitch, she was pretty smart. Alexander didn't come near me at all, and despite my anger, I noted that the physical tension was building again. Wow, unfair. I wanted to be furious with him for forcing me to wear the stupid turtleneck. Yet most of the time, all I could think about was kissing him like yesterday, feeling his body pressed against mine. When class was over, Sarah helped me out by asking me some questions about the homework and insisted on discussing a project she had for art with me. By the time she was done talking, the entire classroom had emptied. Only Jennifer stood right in front of Alexander, pressing herself up against him. It was hilarious to see how he was backing away, till he hit the chalkboard, his eyes frantically trying to meet mine, begging me to get my creepy stepsister away from him. Jennifer knew she wasn't having the desired effect on him yet. She kept cooing at him, making flirty comments. For some reason, Alexander was scrunching up his nose, as if he smelled something he didn't like. I smirked at Sarah, who nodded, and we both made our way over to them. Alexander cast me a relieved look, obviously thinking I was going to free him from Jennifer. Instead, I met Jennifer's eyes and smiled at her. "Good day. Bye, Mr. Clitton." Then I waltzed out the door with a laughing Sarah hot on my heels. Alexander's mortified look was something I wouldn't forget ever. As we reached the cafeteria, Sarah wondered, "You're not scared he's going to fall for your stepsister's charm after all?" I plopped down ungracefully in a chair next to Bob and shook my head, still laughing. "No way. Did you see his face?" I resolved into a fit of giggles that was amplified by Bob looking at me curiously. Sarah nodded with a smile. Just checking. I know Alex would never fall for a girl like your sis anyway. He deserved to be left in her clutches after what he did yesterday. Revenge was very sweet. Although my skin did feel unnaturally tight, I felt tired and a little drained. I was guessing it had something to do with not getting my dose of Alexander. Oh well, it was worth it to see him look so horrified when we left him with Jennifer. I finished my lunch in 10 minutes and was just about to get up with Sarah to go to the bathroom to finally fix that hickey. But a shadow fell over the table from behind me, and without looking, I knew it was Alexander. "What do you want?" I asked without looking up. My skin was tingling with all the tension again, and I had to fight down the urge to jump up and smother him in kisses. "I want you in my classroom right now." He growled the words. Oh, he was really pissed off, wasn't he? I shrugged, still not looking up. "For what reason, Mr. Clitton? Did I do something wrong?" I smirked in Sarah's direction, enjoying myself just a little too much. "Do you want detention again today, Brittany?" Alexander said, not growling now, but still sounding very pissed off. "Fine, I'm coming," I told him, at long last looking behind me to meet his eyes. Only then did I realize that his white dress shirt was soaked, showing off his muscular chest as it clung to his skin tightly. How the hell did that happen? Then I narrowed my eyes at the group of girls to our right that was openly ogling him as if he was eye candy. I got up out of my seat and followed Alexander hurriedly as he stalked out of the cafeteria. He obviously wasn't in the mood to wait for me. He took me through the empty hallways to his English classroom. I wondered how many classes he taught biology. He held open the door for me so I could enter first, and then he slammed it shut behind him, locking the door with an ominous click. I swallowed, but I wasn't worried he'd hurt me. I knew he'd never intentionally do that. Of course, Alexander looked a vision with his white shirt wet, the top few buttons undone. Some of his dark hair had gotten wet too, and it clung to his forehead. My eyes just had to follow the drop of water that ran down his face across his throat to disappear into the V of his shirt down his chest. Alexander's stormy gray eyes were nearly black again as he frowned at my face. "Why didn't you help me? She damn near tried to rape me, Britt. I had to throw water on her to get her away from me." He stalked over to me and I backed up into his desk, my skin shivering and my hands itching to follow the path of that single drop of water across his skin. The fierce, commanding presence, the glare, it made me aware of how masculine he was. He was used to getting his way, to being obeyed. His every move proved that. He trapped me between him and the desk, one hand on either side of me, but he didn't touch me. I smiled at him. "You deserved it, Alexander." I met his angry eyes with my own without hesitation, showing him that for all his bluster he didn't intimidate me. "Deserved it?" he growled. I laughed, feeling confident and happy at having managed to upset him as much as he had me. "Yes." I yanked the collar of my shirt sideways to show him the hickey. "Because of you, I have to wear this stupid, way too warm shirt." With my other hand, I poked his chest, ignoring the sparks that ignited at the touch. His black eyes followed the curve of my neck to rest on the red mark on my skin there, and then he grinned. That male satisfaction appearing on his face again. "I told you not to cover it up. Gramo Troy?" He didn't look all that angry anymore, though. He didn't even look remorseful. I remembered how he'd somehow known about the lullaby last night. With that eerily accurate text message, angry, I poked him in the chest again. "I have to cover it up, you jerk. My stepmother and sister would kill me if they saw it. Oh, and remember, the deal is off." He quirked an eyebrow at me, amused now for some reason. "So you said a run." I did not read your mind, though. I growled and ignored the absurdity of the whole situation. "Then how the hell did you know to text me about the lullaby?" Mind reading was impossible. Instead of replying, Alexander leaned into me, his breath filtering across my lips. "I think we're even. You have a hickey. I've got a wet shirt and we'll have a whole classroom of drooling girls here in a short while." That thought made a hot spark of jealousy stab through me. I did not want all those teenage girls staring at his chest. "I did not read your mind a gras McCoy," he whispered, "and I think you're really sexy when you're mad." After that, he pressed his lips to mine, kissing me fiercely and possessively. I moaned as my body responded, burning warmth spreading through me and pooling low in my body. I automatically spread my legs so he could step in between them. He lifted me effortlessly off the floor and set me down on the edge of his desk. He didn't stop at that, pushing me down further so I was on my back, his body hovering above mine. I was wrapping my legs around his hips, moaning at the contact of his erection as I pulled him closer to me. He broke the kiss to groan, his nearly black eyes roaming down my body as he skimmed a hand across the curve of my breasts. I arched my back as the touch rubbed against my nipple, the skin suddenly painfully tight there. Then he pulled aside the collar of my shirt, tracing his tongue over the hickey. "It's not a real mark, Agramokroyi," he whispered hotly. "A real mark wouldn't fade away, but this will do for now." My thoughts were too incoherent to understand what he was saying. My body was on such a high that it felt like I could burst at any moment. Those hands of his rubbing my breasts and his lower body straining against mine through the fabric of our clothes. Suddenly, he pulled away, and I whined at the loss of body contact. It made him chuckle as I glared at him from under drooping eyelashes. It wasn't fair that he had such a strong effect on me. It seemed one touch would send me down an endless spiral downwards where all I could do was crave for more. As I sat up and pulled my shirt straight, he smirked at me with satisfaction. "You are mine, Brittany." I shivered at the stark possessiveness in his voice, but despite the urge to tell him he didn't own me, a big part of me felt strongly appreciative of the power reflected in him. He was so very male and dominant and powerful. When I felt I had fixed myself enough to look presentable, I stood up. My legs were still wobbly, but I ignored that and closed the distance between us again. I kept my eyes firmly on his face and willed myself to look stern. "I told you the deal was off, Alexander." I glared at him. "So you did a gramo crowy, but I did not break it." He was deadly serious as he replied, his eyes on my lips as I spoke. "You're not allowed to just kiss me like that anymore." Then I spun around and stalked towards the door, planning to leave and not think about him for the rest of the day until I had to see him again at our date. Alexander had something else in mind though, because he stopped me at the door, an amused smile on his lips. "All right, I will ask your permission to kiss you first next time. Now, before you leave, let me fix your hair." Ask my permission to kiss? God, he was impossible. I shivered as he ran gentle fingers through my auburn curls, straightening my hair carefully so that no one could tell I'd just been heavily making out with him. "There, I will see you tonight. Agramokoi. Don't let Sarah bully you into wearing something uncomfortable." I heard a click as he unlocked the door and felt him brush his lips softly against my temple. He stepped away from me, running his hands through his own hair, and then started rebuttoning his shirt. Shocked, I realized I had been responsible for undoing it. "Go, Britt. You don't want to be late for your next class," he said, amused at my stare. I nodded. "See you later, Alexander." Then I walked out the door into the luckily still empty hall. As the door fell shut behind me, I felt a soft touch on my mind, and then the image of Alexander and I on his desk, both of us naked as he drove my body to pleasure. That was not my thought. Asshole was seriously messing with my mind. I could hear Alexander laughing through the door. And damn it, now Sarah still hadn't covered up the hickey, so I had to walk around in that way to hot turtleneck even longer. I had only just enough time to pick up my books and bag, and then I had to go back to class. Sarah was by my side though, with another knowing smile, although she was occasionally distracted by texting Danis. Thanks to Alexander, I spent the rest of the day thinking of him and what we were going to do on our date. I was nervous about that now. What was he going to expect of me? Did he want sex? It certainly seemed that way, and despite our serious kissing, I wasn't sure I was ready for that so soon. "Hey, baby," a low voice suddenly said, right next to me. Shocked, I stepped back, away from Fort. Why did I keep walking into him? He was so bloody sneaky. "Leave me alone, Fort. I'm not in the mood for your crap," I snapped at him. Sidestepping so I could walk around him, I continued on my way with Sarah still by my side. She was shooting him angry glares, but Fort didn't seem impressed by that. "Not in the mood? That sounds promising," the guy said with a smirk. He grabbed my wrist and spun me around. Fort let her go. Sarah yelled angrily while I stared up at his face, imagining a dark wolf prowling behind those eyes of his. "Oh, shut up, freak. You and your witchy boyfriend don't scare me." Fort snapped at Sarah, pushing her away from us roughly. Sarah was slammed sideways into a row of lockers with a loud bang. Surely the teachers had heard that and would come running now. But as I looked around, all I saw was students gathering around to watch. Not a single adult around. Fort turned his attention back on me. I know you want to be with me, baby. There's no need to play hard to get. I find it a rather tiring game. He hadn't let go of my wrist and pulled me into him so hard that I stumbled. You wouldn't talk this way if your dad was in town, Fort. He's going to punish you when he's back. My brother has already spoken to him, Sarah said, her voice controlled. It reminded me of Alexander when he was really mad. Fort laughed loudly, throwing his head back as if he found it really funny. There were several other guys in the crowd around us that laughed along. It was rather creepy. Sarah dear, my father is ancient history. I'm in control now. At those words, he wrapped an arm tightly around my waist. I could feel the hard planes of his body, and to my disgust, his arousal as well. I tried elbowing him hard since I wasn't in the position to knee him in the crotch, but it hurt me more than him. Damn, he was hard. Suddenly, Sarah was by my side, yanking the collar of my turtleneck down to reveal the hickey for everyone to see. She's taken Fort. You know my brother Alexander. If he finds out you touched her, he'll kill you, Sarah hissed. It was hard to understand what she was saying, and I only understood because she was right next to my ear. Still, Fort quickly let go of me and then stepped back, his eyes tight and filled with hatred. In the crowd, those same guys that had laughed now all wore frowns, as if they too had heard what Sarah had said. No one else seemed to notice, though. They were all busy speculating about who had given me the hickey. A lot of them actually thought it had been Sarah. One voice stood out, though. I knew it. I knew you were hiding something. Jennifer, of course she had to see this. Come, Brittany, let's go. A soft tug on my hand was enough to get my feet moving. I followed Sarah through the halls to our next class. At the back of the crowd, I spotted Mr. Cooks, our grizzled math teacher. Why didn't he step in if he'd been here all along? I'm sorry, Sarah, but with Thomas still away, my hands are bound, the fearsome-looking man said to my friend. Sarah just nodded as if she understood his reasons. That left me more questions than answers. Clearly, Fort had some sort of control over the teachers, or maybe just Mr. Cooks. Control that usually lay with Fort's father. But since he was gone at the moment it had passed on to him, I couldn't think of anything that would make sense, though. Nor the fact that those guys in the crowd had definitely heard what Sarah had said, even though she'd been so quiet that I had trouble hearing it, and I had been right next to her. Did they all have super hearing? Sarah didn't want to explain anything when I asked, though, and I couldn't very well ask her what was on my mind anyway during class. So soon enough, last period rolled around, and I happily hurried to the biology classroom. Maybe I could pry some answers from Alexander after class was done. When I got to the class, however, Alexander wasn't there. Instead, Mr. Clitton stood there. Where did Alexander go? Was he sick? Confused, I sat down in the back, as usual, all by myself. I'm replacing Mr. Clitton for today class because he had to take his younger brother Bob Clitton to the hospital, Mr. Clayton explained briefly. After that, he cut right to the chase and started explaining things about the subject we were working on in his boring, monotone voice. Oh, I hoped Bob was all right. It must have been an emergency or something. Class went agonizingly slow without Alexander, and it was that way for everyone. I constantly heard people sigh, and no one seemed to be looking at the chalkboard. Instead, we were all sort of doodling or staring out the window. I was the first out the door when the final bell rang. That was a first for everyone there, obviously, and I heard them whisper amongst each other as I left them behind. Sarah said to meet her outside at the car. Dennis would be waiting for us. He was, leaned against the hood of the car, playing with his phone. As I reached him, he opened his arms for a hug, and I gladly complied. There you all go, Chapter 10. It takes a while because I have to edit things. The next chapters are all written already, but I'm really unhappy with some of the background details in it, so I'm redoing that. Please vote and comment. It definitely helps to motivating me to write faster and update faster. Rough day, Brittany? He asked with a smile. I nodded. Yeah, run in with Fort. He called you a witch and then tossed Sarah into a row of lockers. Dennis froze and stared at me. He called me a witch? I shrugged. Yeah, I don't see why though. You look nothing like a witch. He laughed. Thanks. Is Sarah okay? But just at that moment she appeared, bouncing up to us and jumping in his arms to smother him with kisses. Yeah, she's fine, I told him, although I doubted he was listening. Instead, I got in the car. I had just spotted Jennifer and Fort coming out of the school. Fort wasn't looking at us, but Jennifer was, and she had that evil look on her face that told me trouble was going to find me soon. Are you sure, Sarah? I asked hesitantly as I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I was wearing a skin-tight dark red dress. It was the color of blood. The dress wrapped around my torso elegantly and accentuated my breasts with a narrow split down the front to reveal the inner slopes. The dress left my back bare but flared out around the hips. If I twirled around, the skirt would form a perfect circle around me. It reached till just past my knees with layers to show darker red and black underneath. Of course, Sarah had also managed to get me into heels. I couldn't help it. They were just so pretty that I had to try them on. Once on, Sarah hadn't let me take them off again. They were red too. Darker than the dress, and ribbons tied them to my feet that wrapped around my legs in elegant crosses all the way to my knees. They were so dainty and small that they made my already small feet look tiny. Alexander said to wear something comfortable. I told my friend for the umpteenth time, but I knew she wouldn't listen. To be honest, I thought I looked pretty in the mirror, and the heels and dress might not have been all that comfortable. At least, they made me feel really sexy and feminine. I liked how the low but very narrow plunging neckline accentuated my mother's angel wing necklace too. Sarah sat me down on a chair and started on my hair and makeup, twirling strands into curls and pinning them on my head in a fancy pattern. It looked really pretty and made me think of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. "You look stunning already." "Brittany, and I'm not even done yet," exclaimed Sarah as I expressed my doubts again. I was really nervous about tonight. Would Alexander like the dress? Or would he think I was too young after all? She did my makeup very lightly, just some eyeliner and eyeshadow to accentuate the color of my eyes. She said I didn't need anything else, and when I asked her about the hickey, she'd laughed. "Honey, you'll be with Alexander. He'll want to be able to see it. No need to hide it now. There, you're all done. Let's see if the boys downstairs approve." She made me wait in her bedroom while she called Dennis and Bob to come upstairs. Bob was fine. Apparently the hospital thing had been an excuse, so he and Alexander could leave school earlier. Why they had to leave early, Bob wouldn't explain. When Dennis came in, he whistled loudly. "You clean up real nice, Brittany. Nice work, baby." Then he just totally turned around to hug Sarah and kiss her. Bob shook his head at the antics and then smiled at me. "He's right though, you look amazing. Alexander is going to have a hard time keeping himself from eating you alive." I stared at Bob and felt just a tiny bit scared by that comment. Who complimented someone by saying they might get eaten alive? That's just plain weird. "Go on downstairs then, Brittany. Alexander is waiting at the bottom." I looked at the three people in the room and then breathed in deeply. All right, time to face Alexander. As I slowly descended the grand flight of stairs, I felt a bit like I was in a movie. Alexander was waiting for me at the bottom, and he wore a handsomely tailored suit, black with a dark red tie. I had the feeling that was Sarah's doing. He looked breathtaking, and his stormy gray eyes stared up at me, filled with unadulterated desire that sent hot shivers down my spine, and I nearly stumbled on the last step, his arms catching me before I could fall. He smirked at me. "Falling for me already, Britt?" Blushing. I shook my head. "I'm just not used to heels." "I told you to wear something comfortable. A gram mokroi?" His voice was suave as he slid an arm around my waist and started guiding me out of the house. My heels clicked on the marble floor and then on the cobblestones outside. "You know what Sarah is like? I bet she bullied you into wearing that tie so that we would match," I told Alexander with a smile. We'd reached his car, and like a gentleman, he opened the door for me before running to the other side and getting in himself. "Oh yes, she did. She knows red is one of my favorite colors. You look very edible in red," he said when he got inside and started the engine. Seems like Bob's comment wasn't that weird after all. If Alexander thought I looked edible, "You have Indian blood in you, haven't you?" he asked me suddenly. I nodded, surprised that he had noticed. "Yes, my mother is Cherokee. I thought you just had a nice tan from the summer," Alexander explained, with a look at the narrow neckline and the cleavage showing. "But that's not a tan. It's your natural skin color," blushing. I nodded. It was the one thing Jennifer had never called ugly. I had the distinct feeling, in fact, that she'd always been jealous of my skin. "Where are we going, Alexander?" I asked him, scanning our surroundings. Not that I recognized where we were going. After all, I still didn't know the town all that well. We just turned into a small road, out of town and into the forest that lay around it. "It's a surprise." "A grand mot quoi," he said with a smirk that told me he was really enjoying this. His accent had gone back to sounding Irish, and I felt happy about that. It was a sign he felt comfortable around me, wasn't it? After a few more minutes, the road had wound. It's way up, and then lights came into sight. Alexander helped me get out of the car and lead me down a small path to the opening of a small meadow. The meadow was covered with lanterns hanging from every branch, lighting up the place like a fairy tale. In the middle lay a large plaid, spread out and weighted down on the corners so the wind, however slight, couldn't take hold of it. Just beyond the blanket was a small spring with crystal clear water. It was very shallow, and candles had been placed around it on every flat rock visible. There were floating candles in the water too. I could only stare and wonder, had he really gone through all the trouble of making the meadow look like this? "Do you like it, Guramoshwai?" Alexander whispered in my ear. "It's so beautiful," I told him softly, my voice catching in my throat. I almost wanted to cry because I felt so special. A soft push in my back made me realize he wanted me to go to the blanket and sit down. I blushed and walked over to it, happy to sink down on the softness and hide my legs underneath the wide skirt of the dress. It was colder outside than I expected. Alexander had been carrying a large picnic basket with him, and I felt silly for not having noticed it before. He sat down beside me and started unpacking it, revealing plates and glasses and a bottle of sparkling champagne. Then he took out steaming warm pastries and other delicious-smelling food. He smiled at my wide eyes as he piled food on a single plate. Who knew Danis was so good at cooking? Then he handed me the plate and stretched his legs out behind me, so that part of my side was leaning against them. It felt nice and warm, and immediately I didn't feel cold anymore. As I took a bite of the food, I couldn't help but sigh at the explosion of taste on my tongue. This was absolutely divine. I took a small bit between my fingers and reached over to him. "You have to try this. It's heavenly." His eyes followed my hand, and then he obediently leaned forward to allow me to put the food in his mouth. I shivered as his lips brushed my fingers. He chewed slowly and then swallowed. "He should go professional with food like that," he murmured. His eyes were still on me as I tried more of the food, watching my expression avidly as if it was the most interesting thing in the world. "Aren't you going to eat?" I asked after a while, feeling uncomfortable with him watching me eat. He shrugged. "I don't eat much gromogroi. Would you like some wine?" He started pouring the clear champagne into 2 wine glasses and handed me one without waiting for a reply. "Surely you must eat something." "Alexander." I frowned at him as I put my plate away and accepted the glass he handed me. "Don't worry about me, Britt. I will explain something to you in a short moment. Let me enjoy watching you for just a little longer," Alexander said, his voice soft and amused, a twinkling in his gray eyes as he looked at my face as if trying to memorize every little detail. Blushing, I looked away and took a few sips from the champagne. Why was he looking at me like that? Was he afraid I would disappear? Or run away? His fingertips tilted my chin up so I would meet his eyes. "I just want to remember you as you are now." I stared at him and suddenly worried that he was going to be the one to run away. He changed his mind. He didn't want to lose his job after all. "I want to remember you as you are before I tell you my secret agramokoi." Secret? Was he going to explain me about the mind-reading thing? I already guessed that much, hadn't I? And I hadn't run away screaming or declared him a lunatic. Since I had finished eating, Alexander repacked all the food items back into the basket and pulled out a plate of strawberries. I had told him those were my favorite fruit. If it was up to me, I'd eat them every day. "Dessert?" He smiled. But the smile didn't quite reach his eyes this time. He seemed nervous somehow. Was whatever secret he wanted to tell me really that big, that he was afraid to tell me? I popped a strawberry in my mouth and stared at him curiously. "You know you can tell me anything, Alexander." "I know, Britt, but this is, well, you'll understand once I've told you, I hope." He shifted closer to me and ran his fingers over the hickey on my neck. It wasn't on purpose. A run. I lost control. I shrugged even as I shivered at his touch. I'm not mad about it anymore. For some reason, it scared off Fort. "Good," he nodded. Then, hesitating, as if he thought of how to phrase something, he said, "Do you really believe I can read your mind?" Oh, so it was about the mind reading after all. Either you're really good at reading facial expressions, or you can read minds. Although, I thought about how to explain the text message from the night before. "Yes?" he prompted. "That message you sent me last night? About the lullaby and the hickey and hay and I always being welcome. Why did you send that?" How did you know I had just sung that lullaby? That's not even mind reading, that has to be, I don't know, telepathic. Or were you secretly standing outside my bedroom window or something? Alexander nodded. Telepathic is the word I'd use. I was at home. Bob and Danis can testify to that. But we have this connection, Britt. I don't even mean to listen in, but, well, as with the lullaby, I just heard. I shivered as he confirmed that I wasn't imagining those things, at least. I felt almost relieved about that. Do you have that with a lot of people? I wondered. He shook his head. No, just you, agromo kroi. Sarah is the telepathic one, not me. Or at least, I'm not very strongly telepathic. Sarah is telepathic? Oh, no wonder she always looks like she knows everything, I exclaimed. I was a little worried that I wasn't freaking out about this yet, but I supposed it was because I already knew this. Sort of. Alexander, have you? When you read my mind, can you put feelings or thoughts in it too? I asked as I thought about all the times I felt a soft caress on my mind, filling me with warm feelings. I remembered the image of us on the desk too. It made me blush again. Alexander shrugged. Yes, I suppose, but you would recognize them as foreign. I can't make you think something. Relieved, I nodded. So it was you that filled my head with nice things every night before I fell asleep? And countless other moments like that? A smile tugged at his lips as he nodded. Very good. I hadn't realized you had noticed all that. He seemed a little proud of that fact even. I swear though, Agramo Croy, that I haven't intentionally read your mind again after we made that deal. Anything I picked up since then was because you were sending so strongly. He opened his arms and I gladly crawled into them, rejoicing in his warmth. Sending strongly? Yes. For example, last night you angled a thought directly at me. You're going to pay for that hickey, Mr. Clitton. Oh, and the deal is off. I could hear the smile in his voice as he said it. That was very funny. A run? I fell out of bed laughing. I shivered as he quoted the exact sentence I had thought last night, sending it to him because I felt like he'd spied on me with the lullaby. You really fell out of bed, Alexander? I frowned. I thought I'd imagined that happening. And did Bob barge in to check if you were all right? Alexander chuckled, and that sent a pleasant vibration through my body. Yes, gramo kroi. That is exactly what happened. You planted that image in my head then, because I remember it, I told him. I felt him shake, although I couldn't see his face seated like this. No, Britt. That was all your own doing. I twisted around so I could see his face. Are you saying I'm telepathic too or something? He was frowning and tugged me into his lap. It made my heartbeat race. No, I don't think you are. We are just very connected. Why? Why, what a grormo croy. He focused his stormy gray eyes on mine. Why do you think we're connected? I asked even as my heart screamed at me that it was true. That connection even now told me that Alexander wasn't as nervous as before. My easy acceptance of the whole telepathy thing, it had eased his mind. Do you believe in love at first sight, Brittany? He asked instead of answering my question. I breathed in sharply. Was it a coincidence that he echoed Sarah now? Or at least my very own thoughts when Sarah told me about her feelings for Danis? I knew that when she explained her feelings, I had thought that before Alexander, I wouldn't have believed it. I felt my cheeks heating up as I blushed, but I nodded at him. Yes, I believe in it. The muscles in his arms were tense as he wrapped them around me. So do I. I also believe in soulmates. Have you heard of that principle? Twisting further in his lap, I made sure I was facing him by wrapping my arms around his neck, my fingers automatically entangling in his silky hair. I have heard of it. For a moment, Alexander closed his beautiful eyes, breathing in deeply as if he enjoyed the feel of my hands in his hair. My heart was beating wildly in my chest now, nervous about what he was going to say next. Brittany, he trailed off. And for the first time ever, I realized that he was unsure of himself, as if he was afraid that his next words would scare me off. You think we are soulmates? I asked him, wanting desperately to ease his mind. I couldn't stand to see him unsure. It wasn't right. He gasped at my bold words, his eyes flying open to meet mine. Yes, I believe that. Smiling at him, I leaned in and softly brushed my lips across his in a feather-light kiss. So do I, because the word soulmate rang like a chime in my mind. I could only too well remember what it had felt like when I first laid eyes on him. Love at first sight definitely fit that description. But it was more, much more than that. Because I felt whole around him, complete, and despite our differences, I also felt safe and accepted, and he always made me feel at ease. So at ease that I found myself telling him things I usually didn't share. The need to share with him was very strong too, and the need to actually be with him even stronger. That elastic band feeling, it felt like being away from him literally put a strain on my body, and it was so hard to be around him when I couldn't actually touch him. Not to mention that mental connection we obviously shared. Alexander kissed me again, fiercer than my kiss had been, but gentle nonetheless. It wasn't like any of the kisses we'd shared before, except maybe the first one. You believe me? You don't think I'm a creep? A freak? He asked a little breathlessly, pushing me down on my back on the blanket, hovering over me, leaning his weight on his arms on either side of me. Alexander, of course not. I wouldn't think you're a creep. I feel the same. I pulled his face down to mine for another kiss. Good, he said as we came up for air, because I love you and I'm not letting you go. His arrogance restored now obviously. Despite the fact that I knew what the whole soulmate principle implied, I still shivered in delight at hearing him say that he loved me. It made me glow on the inside, and wishing to share that feeling with him, I reached out, not with my body but with my mind. I love you too, Alexander, he moaned. So maybe you are telepathic, Croy. You're too good at it already. I felt him touch my mind with his, and he reflected what he felt back, just like I had done. The fierce drive to protect me was shocking, and made my heart swell, followed by so much tenderness and love. He was glowing too from the inside out. Desire had flared up in him now, and he attached his lips to mine again, kissing me so passio-Alexly that my toes curled in my shoes. He held himself in check though this time, his gray eyes boring into mine as we parted for air. His hands still on either side of me holding on to the blanket we were lying on. Britt, he started, but feeling confident I shushed him. Alexander, will you tell me what a croy means now? What I asked him. He frowned at my interruption but then said, Agramokwa means my heart's beloved. I call you that because it is what you are, I smiled. That is really sweet. The thought that he'd basically been saying he loved me all this time was really amazing. Blushing, I kissed him again. Do I need to have an endearment to call you all the time too? He chuckled. No, I rather like it when you call me Alexander. No one these days uses my full name anymore. I pushed him over so he was on his back and straddled him. I had only been able to push him over because he had allowed me to. I knew that if he wanted to remain on top, he'd have no problem staying there. He raised a single eyebrow and looked up at me with an amused expression on his face, although I could feel that the action had aroused him. I was sitting right on top of the evidence. My skirt flared out around my hips so that it draped over his chest and down his legs. Was there something else you wanted to tell me? I asked him, remembering how I had interrupted him and that we had sort of gotten sidetracked on the whole soulmate thing. It wasn't what he originally wanted to tell me. He stared at me for a moment, his hands coming up to grab my hips, one of them sliding further upwards across my bare back before pulling me down, so that I was lying on his chest and he could wrap his arms around me, my head tucked into the crook of his neck. I think you've had enough information to process for one night, don't you? I heard rustling and then a second blanket was pulled over the both of us, protecting me from the cold of the night. There's more? I asked him, my lips moving against the skin of his throat as I spoke. I couldn't help but smile in satisfaction at the goosebumps that appeared. Yes, I'm afraid there is, but it can wait, he said honestly, and I liked how his chest moved underneath me as he spoke. Can you at least explain to me why you claim you don't need to eat? I was starting to feel really sleepy now, but I didn't want to fall asleep just yet. It was quiet for a while, and then he said softly, I don't claim I don't need to eat. I just require a different kind of sustenance. Oh, like what? I asked curiously, moving my arms to slip them into his jacket. He was so nice and warm. I thought he wasn't going to reply because he was quiet for a long time. I even thought for a short moment that he'd fallen asleep, but as I gently touched my mind to his, I could feel he was still awake. It was so easy now to reach out with my mind and touch him. Almost second nature. Suddenly, he took a deep breath, lifting me a little in the air and slowly lowering me as he exhaled and his chest expanded. Blood? It's blood I need, he said then, his voice so soft and husky that I barely heard him. My mind already so foggy with sleep that I thought I misunderstood. Blood? Like a vampire? I asked him even though the question sounded silly in my head. My soft whisper made it sound absolutely serious. Alexander didn't laugh as I said it though. I had expected him to do that, but he didn't. He didn't say anything at all. Instead, he let me drift off to sleep. Just before I was gone, I heard him whisper, "Yes, Brittany, exactly like a vampire." I woke up feeling rather hazy and warm. There was a scent in my nostrils that I wished I could wake up to every morning. It smelled like Alexander. Stretching. I turned around and curled up again, quickly drifting off for another hour or so, until at last the room had gotten too light for my senses to ignore it. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was that the bed was empty. I was alone. The second thing I noticed was that I was most definitely in Alexander's room, and I was wearing a shirt of his instead of PJs. The shirt was large enough to be a dress or nightgown though. My eyes searched for a clock and finally landed on the analog, old-fashioned alarm on his nightstand. It read 10 a.m. Oh, fuck. I sat up straight and scrambled out of bed. I was missing school. Shit. Why didn't he wake me up? Where was he anyway? Don't tell me he went to school and left me here. Searching around the room, I couldn't find my own clothes anywhere, so I slipped on the way to a large pair of sweats that were his. They had been folded over a chair in the corner. I was about to open the door to search for my clothes or overnight bag when the memories of last night crashed into me. There was a lot of white noise as my mind scrambled around all the impossible things it wanted to forget. Soulmates. The words tumbled off my lips and I had to sit down again on the edge of the bed. Alexander believed we were soulmates, and I told him I believed so too. I realized I still believed that. I was already missing him terribly. Then there was this whole thing about telepathy, and a connection that Alexander and I apparently shared that allowed us to touch each other's minds and share thoughts. I wouldn't have believed that if I didn't remember clearly doing that and experiencing that myself these past few days. Just to prove it was true, I focused my thoughts on Alexander and called out in my head, "Alexander? Are you at school? Why didn't you wake me?" I didn't feel or hear anything, and I was almost starting to think it hadn't worked and I was making a fool of myself. But then I felt it, a soft caress across my mind and Alexander's voice sounding amused. I tried a grand mot croyé. You were sleeping very deeply. Enjoy your day off. I called you in sick. Danis is around the house somewhere if you want company. I had the vague sense of a classroom I was looking out over, and then that image was gone. Okay, that was pretty cool. I hadn't imagined that. If only he could have told me where my bag with clothes was. I was just about to leave the room again to find either my clothes or Danis when I remembered the last words he'd said to me before I'd fallen asleep. Yes, Brittany, exactly like a vampire. With my hand on the doorknob, I stared at the dark wood. Had that been my sleep supplying those words? Or had Alexander really told me last night that he was in fact a vampire? I angled the thought at him immediately, and the answer was instant. His sending no more than a single word. Yes. On wobbly legs, I turned back around and crawled into his bed. Maybe I should just go back to sleep. It seemed my mind wasn't functioning properly after all. When I woke up for the third time that day, it was because my stomach was growling angrily. The scent of fresh apple pie and cinnamon hung in the air, and without thinking, I scrambled out the door and down the stairs. Following my nose, I ended up in the kitchen where indeed Danis was cooking up all kinds of delicious things. His back was turned to me, but he started piling food on a plate for me even before I'd said hello. "There you go, Sleeping Beauty," he said as he handed me the food. "So, how are you feeling?" I dug in while I thought about that. I wanted to go as exy. I wanted to go as possible so that I could check on Britt. I was worried because she had taken the whole "I'm a vampire" thing rather well. She felt so serene and calm that it seemed almost unnatural. The last time I told someone what I was, well, that person hadn't taken it so stoically, and I couldn't believe that Britt showed so little emotion over the whole thing. She must be in some sort of shock, and I wanted to be there to make sure she was all right when the truth sank in. Although, the mental link, she'd picked that up so fast. She'd even managed to contact me twice already today, and once 2 nights ago. During third period, I constantly looked at the empty seat she usually sat in. Sarah was sitting in her usual seat next to it with the biggest grin ever on her face. She was completely hyper over the fact that Britt now knew what we were, although I'd only said I was a vampire. Jennifer sat in the front as was usual, and instead of her constant flirting, she stared at me with this intense, focused look. It gave me the chills. That look told me she was trying very hard to figure something out. Something about me. Before I'd met Britt, I would have gotten Bob and Sarah and moved to a new location to prevent people from finding out what we were. Now, I wasn't worried about Jennifer figuring out what I was, but what I was to Britt and she to me. No matter how often Britt assured me that she got along all right with Jennifer and that she didn't need help, I knew Jennifer was out to get her, out to get my mate, and I couldn't let that happen. When class finished, I found myself alone with Jennifer. "Hello, Mr. Clitton," she said, her normally sultry voice gone to make place for an all-business one. "Hello, Jennifer," I replied, fixing a stern look on my features. "Is there something you wanted to ask? Anything you didn't get during class?" It was hard to sound polite since my voice wanted very badly to snarl, and the monster within me wanted to smack the girl silly for having hurt my mate. She smiled, and suddenly the air around us filled with that pheromone scent that came from her more siren qualities. That had to have been a deliberate act. I was suddenly doubting my assertion that she knew nothing of that heritage. "I want to make you a deal, Mr. Clitton, or can I call you Alexander as well?" she said. The sound of my name coming from her lips was wrong, especially after I'd told Britt last night how she was the only one who called me that nowadays. "It's Mr. Clitton, Jennifer. I might be young for a teacher, but that doesn't mean you get to call me by my first name." My tone was barely civilized now. She smirked then, and I wondered if that was because of the outright lie I'd just spoken. After all, I was easily 10 times older as the oldest teacher on staff here. "Suit yourself. I know you allow Brittany to call you that, though. Not in public." The words left my throat before I could stop myself, and after I'd said them, I knew there was no backing down. She's exceptionally bright. The assignments she turns in are college level. I've been helping her getting a possible scholarship and giving her extra work that is more challenging. Now, if you'd show the same potential, I might consider doing the same for you, but it seems your talents lay elsewhere. Now, if you'd excuse me." Jennifer folded her arms underneath her chest, pressing her ample bosom up so she nearly popped out of her top. "No, you're not excused, Mr. Clitton." She said the name mockingly. Clearly, she didn't buy my story. I raised an eyebrow at her and upped my own mental abilities. Putting as much power as I dared with a human into the command, I said, "Leave, Jennifer. Don't bother me again." Her spine stiffened and her feet were already moving in the direction of the door, but to her credit, she was fighting the command. She didn't think I was very threatening. She thought she was the predator and I was the prey, not the other way around. It gave her the strength she needed to fight it. That plus her own slight resistance to it. I turned on my glare and opened my mouth slightly, letting her see a hint of fang. "You do not want to piss me off, Jennifer. It would not be pleasant for you. I, however, might very much enjoy snapping your neck." She stopped fighting and was nearly out the door before she managed to say with a very strained voice, "I guess that means no deal. Too bad for you, Brittany isn't going to like what will happen." The little wench was out the door before I could stop her, and as I sped after her, I saw she had a whole crowd of groupies waiting for her outside. My throat dry and thirst flaring, I watched her sashay away. I could tell she was scared of me now, but not scared enough to keep her hands off Britt. I had to fight down the urge to contact Britt and tell her and Dennis to get her stuff from home so she could permanently move into my house. Knowing Brittany, she wouldn't take that very well. She'd never leave her brother behind. I understood that. I'd never leave Sarah or Bob if I didn't know they were safe. "Sarah, keep an eye on Jennifer. She's up to something." I sent the thought to my sister, but it wasn't half as easy as sending thoughts to Britt was, even though I've been doing this for centuries. I vented my anger by setting fire to a stack of papers I was going to throw out. It wasn't very satisfying, but the power inside me rolled when I tapped into it. It felt good, like stretching your muscles after sitting still for a long time. When at long last the last students had left and I had no more classes to teach, I all but ran to my car. It felt agonizingly slow to move that way. I wished it was dark already and I could run home instead of drive. It would be nice to move at vampiric speed and stretch my body. Sarah and Bob were both waiting and they got in without a word, sensing my need for speed. Although Sarah seemed to be in just as much of a hurry as I was, she kept saying how much she had to tell Britt now that she knew. Every time I tried to tell her I hadn't told Britt about her being a vampire too, she'd shush me and launch into another topic. Finally, I gave up. I'm sure Britt had figured it out herself, or else probably Dennis had told her by now. When we reached the house, I could feel Britt's emotions much clearer, and I knew she was in the kitchen talking to Dennis and tasting food. She was completely relaxed and anxious for me to get home. I drew in a relieved breath and followed Sarah inside at a more reasonable pace. "Brittany?" Sarah chirped happily as she bounded into the kitchen and enveloped my mate into a nearly bone-crushing hug. "I'm so glad you know now. I have so much to tell you." The words rushed out of Sarah's mouth at surprising speed, and I wondered if Britt even got half of it. Sarah's enthusiasm made me realize how badly she'd missed a female friend these past centuries. It was obvious now, and I felt sorry that I had not noticed it. If I'd known, I would have chosen locations to live at with more vampires. Despite my distaste for most of the female vampires, I did not appreciate the fact that women always seemed to go after the strongest, most powerful, and commanding men. Sarah was still spewing words at Britt, telling her about how lonely she'd been without someone to share things with, and that she hated lying. Brittany was staring with open-mouthed surprise at my sister, and when Sarah noticed, she abruptly shut up. Britt looked at me for a moment and then turned to Sarah. "You're a vampire too?" Yes, you only told her about yourself, didn't you?" Sarah turned to me to glare, and I smiled as I crossed my arms in front of my chest and leaned against the door jamb. "I've been trying to tell you that the entire ride home, der fear oj," I told her with a smirk. Behind Sarah, Britt giggled at my sister's expression, and I opened my arms, signaling that I wanted a hug. My heart literally jumped when she didn't hesitate in hurrying over. Tension I hadn't known was there drained away as soon as I wrapped my arms around her small frame. Her delicious scent wrapping itself around my head. Much better. I sent her the thought and sighed when I felt the same emotions reflected inside her. She'd missed me and she really didn't care about what I was. "I have so many questions," Britt said, and she shyly looked up at me and then at Sarah. "Bob's a vampire too, then, right? Are you even really siblings?" Sarah giggled, her good humor restored as she nodded. "Yeah, he is, and yeah, we are. Let's sit down in the living. I made cake to celebrate," proposed Dennis as he picked up a very pretty-looking cake and raised it to show us. "Celebrate what?" I wondered. "The billiards of visities at their Zespignus in 80 fried, which we have in Taystab, which we 80 daptures into the supernatural community," said Sarah. She'd obviously read his mind, and Dennis beamed at her as she danced over to him, grabbed his hand, and led him out into the living. I thought it was really sweet that Dennis wanted to welcome me with cake, but it seemed a bit like a waste if he and I would be the only ones to eat it. Alexander unwrapped his arms from around me and tugged me with him into the living. There, he gracefully sat down on one of the couches. Bob was already seated in one of the big chairs, and Dennis and Sarah sat snuggled on the love seat. 2 plates set with cake. I took one and then sat down next to Alexander. He didn't hesitate to wrap his arm around my shoulders and pulled me sideways into him. His breath filtering across the back of my neck, it made goosebumps rise on my arms. To hide my blush, I took a bite of the cake and then nearly moaned at the taste explosion in my mouth. Seriously, Dennis should be chef in his own restaurant or something. It was just that good. Alexander chuckled. "She likes it, Dennis. Maybe I should offer you a job." "I think Bellavane could use another cook." Dennis laughed. "Cool. Now, what questions did you have, Gromacroy?" Alexander asked as I put the empty plate on the salon table. He surprised me by pulling my legs across his lap and wrapping his arms around me so tightly that I was practically sitting in it. "I missed you, Britt, and in a little while you have to go home," he offered as an explanation, the thought gentle and filled with a sense of longing that I couldn't entirely place. Was it because he'd missed me and longed for me then, or did he long for something even now? I sorted my mind so I could ask the questions that had been ghosting through my head all day. Talking with Dennis hadn't helped. He'd raised more questions than answered. I understood he really was a witch now, and that his grandmother was apparently called the Crone, which meant she was the oldest and leader of the witches in this community. But about vampires? He hadn't known all that much, and he certainly hadn't been willing to discuss them. He said I should ask Alexander every time I asked something mostly. Okay. Do you really drink blood, and how often do you have to?" I asked. I was a little worried about that. It wouldn't do if my boyfriend was a murderer. although I didn't think they had to kill when they took blood. We really drink blood. Britt, it depends on the vampire how often they need to feed and how well they are able to control themselves, Alexander said with a gentle smile. I go about 2 to 3 weeks in between feeds, said Sarah. But I knew a vamp once who fed only once every 6 months. He was really old though. How often do you feed? I asked Alexander. 2 weeks, but lately a little more often again. By the way, Bob, that was good advice. It does make things more bearable. Made what more bearable? Bob nodded and then spoke. For the first time ever since I met him with full articulation. I knew it would, Alex. Before you ask, Brittany, I feed once a week, often even twice. For me, it is much harder to control my fangs when I'm not full. As he said it, I realized I could see his fangs. As he moved his lips, I would catch glimpses of the elongated teeth. They come out whenever I'm around humans, Bob said, flashing me a rather wry smile. I understood why he never talked much now, and why if he did, he always mumbled. It was to hide his fangs. Okay, how about daylight? None of you seem affected, so that's a myth? And garlic and steaks and crosses? They all laughed, including Danis. None of that works. Depending on the age of a vampire, steaks work sometimes through the heart or the head. For me, they'd have to remove my brain to actually kill me, for all of us here, I think, Alexander explained. Oh, why the brain and not the heart? That was completely new. I hadn't heard of that before. If you take out my heart, or at least stake it, it would regenerate eventually. It's only a muscle, and we don't actually need it to pump blood through our system. Our brain. It still seats the center of control. Remove that completely, and it wouldn't regenerate and thus kill us, Alexander said as he ran his hands over my back, tracing patterns. But a young vampire would die if you staked his heart? I wondered. Yeah, the longer we live, the more our very cells become infused with the immortality. The rate at which this goes is different for everyone, so the older you are, the more physical trauma you can regenerate from. A few decades isn't enough to keep you alive if you fall from the 20th floor or something, or get run over by a truck. A few centuries probably is. Oh, and how do you become a vampire? Do you really exchange blood or something? That would be interesting to know, because maybe one day I'd have to become one. I couldn't keep growing older each day and eventually die while Alexander lived on forever young. You actually do, yes. But it's taxing on the maker, so it doesn't happen very often. It's very dangerous for the maker to make more than one person into a vampire in a short period of time. We don't know why exactly, because the blood exchanged isn't enough to even drain you a little. Sarah was the one to tell me this, and for some reason she looked at Bob as she did. Okay, so vampires don't lightly make that decision? How come you 3 were all turned then? I asked. It seems strange that 3 siblings would all be made. Or did they all have different makers? I was turned first, said Bob, and then I turned Sarah and Alexander myself. I gasped at this new information. Was that why Bob had more trouble with control? Because he'd turned 2 people? Alexander nodded, following my train of thought. We think that has to do with it, yes. It is possible he gave so much of his strength and power to us when he turned us, that it left him none for himself. Powers? I had to ask about that later. We lived in a small village in Ireland, a place that no longer exists. Bob was 18 when he ran away from home. Alexander started. Sarah clapped her hands. Yes, Alex, tell her the whole story. I love it when you tell stories. Alexander nodded and cast Bob a searching look, as if to ask if that was okay. Because it was obvious this was largely Bob's story. I didn't see Bob nod, but something was communicated between the 2 males. We come from a large family, such as almost all families were during that time. Our mother bore 13 children, of which 4 died before their 10th birthday. Sarah was the youngest and Bob nearly the oldest, 1 sister and brother born before him, both already married and living in their own houses. A beautiful woman had appeared in town. She was what many women called a temptress. Succubus, a woman that would lure innocent men and eat them. They weren't completely wrong. The woman was a vampire, but although she ate them, she didn't kill her victims. Deidre, her name was Deidre. It means tears, Bob said, emotion reflected in his voice that I couldn't quite place. It was clear this woman had meant a lot to him, though. Alexander nodded, and as he continued, his voice sounded more Irish with every word he spoke. Bob was drawn to Deidre, and one day he declared to our parents that he wished to marry her. Father refused and said she was evil, wrong. Bob ran away, and we didn't see him again for 10 years. Wow. Bob was seriously a lot older than Alexander. I was 15 when he disappeared and 25 when I saw him again. That was the night he turned me. The entire village had been struck by disease, and after that, famine. The disease killed many people during the first wave, among them a lot of our siblings and father. Alexander hesitated a short moment then before saying, I was married and had my own house, next to the smithy where I'd been apprenticed for a very long time before taking over. The smith had no sons left alive. The second wave of disease killed both my children, one of them barely more, then an infant. It drove my wife mad with grief, and she killed herself while I was out to visit Sarah, my only sibling left alive in town. I felt shocked. Alexander had been married and had 2 children, and he'd lost it all to a stupid disease? A disease that nearly killed his entire family? I was weak and sick from hunger. Everyone was like that, but some were sicker than others. I wasn't so sick that I would have died, but Sarah was. The very day my wife died would have been the last for her too if Bob hadn't showed up. I was mad at him at first, but mostly I was shocked. He hadn't aged a single day since last I'd seen him. Bob looked grief-stricken as he told me he'd only just heard the news about all the deaths in town. He said he'd come as fast as possible. Then he offered us the miracle cure for Sarah, the thing that had kept him young. There? Alexander stopped and looked at Bob again. Alexander didn't trust me. He couldn't believe I had something to offer that would save Sarah. I looked like a vagabond and couldn't blame him. My clothes torn and dirty, blood caked on the sleeves and around the neckline of my shirt. He wanted me to cure him first, so that he knew it worked. I told him it would kill him, but that he'd wake up again all better. I was desperate, though. I needed him to agree and let me save Sarah. I couldn't allow my entire family to die. So I attacked him and nearly drained him before he could say any more, then fed him my blood. While Alexander was out and undergoing the change, I did the same to Sarah. I knew she didn't have much time left. Not enough to wait for Alexander to gain consciousness again. The second time was much harder, and it left me so weak that, for a while, I thought I would be the one to die. Alexander picked up the story again. When I woke up, my senses were much better, and I was filled with a thirst I couldn't understand. I found a pale and unconscious Bob on the floor next to Sarah, but Sarah looked so much better than before. The vampirism had already healed the sores, and she no longer looked emaciated, and she looked beautiful again. Like I remembered her, she was pale though, and she felt cold. For a moment I thought she was dead because she wasn't breathing, but then she opened her eyes. Sarah interrupted. We don't have to breathe, just like we don't have a heartbeat. But we go through the motion of breathing so not to scare you humans. Alexander nodded. After that, Bob explained what we were, and ever since we've been roaming around in the world. Living in places for a few years at a time, and returning to some places we like every other generation. We were all quiet for a moment while I absorbed all this information. Then suddenly Dennis said, I'm glad you saved her, Bob. Thank you. Only then did I realize that this was new for him too, and that he'd been just as enraptured as I had been. Alexander shifted his legs and then tightened his arms around me. It is time for you to go home. A grand mot croyez. I will drive you. I groaned before I could stop myself. I didn't want to go home at all, although for Andy's sake, I knew I would anyway. It would just be very hard to be without Alexander yet again. It felt like I'd barely been with him all day. Maybe it's better if I drive? Can't take the risk of Jennifer seeing you, Alex, Sarah said, and I knew she was right, and so did Alexander, but we both groaned and shook our head at the same time. A little uncomfortable, I sat in the passenger seat of Sarah's car. She'd allowed Alexander 5 minutes in private to say goodbye to me. The whole argument would have been funny if not for the fact that I was on the losing side. After all, Sarah was 7 years Alexander's junior, and she totally strong-armed him to do as she said. Of course it didn't help that Alexander knew she was right, and wasn't really putting up that much of a fight. He'd taken me aside, straight into his office, and attacked my lips as soon as the door closed. That was the reason I was uncomfortable now. Sarah was wearing that knowing smile on her face, and it was very unsettling. We were nearly there when she said suddenly, I know this is private for a lot of people, but we're friends, right? Confused, I nodded. Of course we are. How does your mark look? I stared at her. Mark? Did she mean the hickey? Yeah, your soulmate mark, Sarah clarified. I was still staring, but I really didn't know what she was talking about. I knew Alexander had said something once about how the hickey wasn't a real mark, because that should be permanent. But I was pretty sure I didn't have anything like that. He hasn't marked you yet? Sarah's eyebrows climbed up in surprise, and then she was suddenly pulling her shirt up to show her left hip. Just above the line of her pants there was a marking. It looked silvery lined with black. With elegant lines and dots, they shaped a heart encircled with pretty swirls and music notes entwined. It seemed almost alive and flowed with her skin. The colors like nothing ink could do. This is mine. Not all marks actually have a heart. They are unique for each couple and reflect a little of their personalities. That's why a lot of couples hide them. They are afraid to reveal things about themselves to others. Alexander was going to give me a mark like that? How would he do it? I scrunched up my face as I tried to imagine it. Would it involve him biting me? No, Dennis didn't have fangs and he'd marked Sarah, so that couldn't be it. Sarah smiled. The heart reflects how passio Alex we both are. The swirls indicate sense and steam. They're for Dennis's talents as a cook amongst other things, while the music notes are for me. It's very beautiful, miss. It seems a little weird that just the females get the mark. It's like marking territory or something. That seemed a little off to me. I didn't want to go around with this big sign saying I was Alexander's while nobody could tell he was mine. Sarah laughed. You get to mark him too, Brittany. Dennis has the same mark as I do, but his is right over his heart. You should start thinking about where you want yours and where you'd want to mark Alexander. It's important you get that mark soon. Werewolves can smell you're marked. They'll leave you alone after that. It's very sacred in their culture. In every culture, really. Least in the vampire culture, though. Werewolves? Of course there would also be werewolves out there. Silly not to expect that. Yeah, Fort's one actually. And so is Mr. Cook's. Fort is going to be the next alpha in town when his father dies. Nobody likes him, though. I shivered as I processed that information and remembered my dream about Fort changing into a wolf. I told Sarah about it and she smiled. You seem really sensitive to all kinds of supernatural stuff. Like the mind reading, too. Alex told me how good you are at talking to him mentally already. Seems like you picked up on what he was unconsciously. We'd reached the big house, and I hesitated in getting out. How do you make that mark? A knowing look appeared on Sarah's face again, and then she smirked. You'll know, Brittany. Don't worry about it. As I marched up the steps to the house and pulled out my keys, I felt Alexander touch my mind gently. Be stronger, gra mo kroi. You know how to reach me if you need anything. I waved as Sarah drove away, and then stepped into the house, only just in time remembering that I was supposedly sick, slumping my shoulders and fake coughing once I shuffled up the stairs to my room without saying hello to anyone. There, I hurriedly changed into PJs and crawled in bed with a book. If my stepmother would come looking for me, I looked credible enough now, and I knew that Hay would find me in my room if he wanted me. Soon, there was a knock on my door, and then Stephanie burst in. Where have you been all day? I pretended to be drowsy as I looked at her and then said softly, In bed mostly. I called in sick at school, caught a bug. The woman frowned at me suspiciously, but then her expression cleared. You weren't here though. I had the nanny check your room when Jennifer called that you were not at school. Explain that? And if you're sick, then you won't mind if I check your temperature? I shrugged and explained that as I'd been sleeping over at Sarah, she'd let me sleep because I was sick, and she had just driven me home a short while ago. I'd spend the day in bed in her guest room, not here. When my stepmother went to get the thermometer, I hurriedly went to the bathroom and stuck a washcloth under the hot water tap, running it so hot that it steamed. I took that with me and hid it in my lap under the duvet. I knew Stephanie would be easily distracted, so I could pop the thermometer in the hot washcloth, tweaking the temperature just a little. I was lucky because her phone rang, and I managed to get the thermometer to the point where it looked like I had just a tiny bit of a fever. I held it up to her while she was still talking on the phone, and as she read the number, she nodded, obviously looking a little defeated. When she hung up, she told me, Fine, you're sick. That means you're not going to school tomorrow either. The woman watched in satisfaction as my face fell. No Alexander tomorrow. The evil woman had known I didn't want that. She sashayed out of my room saying, I'll make sure the maids keep an eye on you. If you need anything, you can ask them. Oh, and I want your phone. You're not talking to your friends till you're better. As the door closed behind her, I tossed the washcloth out and angrily clenched my fists. They just always knew how to get to me. Alexander touched my mind. You alright, Agromo Croy? Are you in trouble? With the thought came a sense of warmth and love. I went to shake my head and then realized he couldn't see that and angled a thought towards him instead. No, I'm not. I managed to convince her I really was sick. Correction, I'm sick. But now she won't let me go to school tomorrow. And she took my phone. I knew he could feel how upset I was about that fact. It meant I wouldn't be seeing him until Friday. I can always sneak in through your bedroom window. The thought held a dark, sensual promise that made my skin feel a little too tight. He seemed to know I wouldn't take him up on that offer and send another thought. We can talk like this, gramo kroi. It is effortless now. We don't need phones. I can sense you are still full of questions. Ask away. I shivered but was glad to oblige. When you feed, how does that work? Do you go to a bar and pick up a person and just bite them? I sensed amusement as he took a moment to formulate a reply. I don't like going to bars. The taste of blood infused with alcohol. I don't like it. But yes, we do just walk up to our victim and bite them. Every vamp does it differently. Some use hypnotism, others just wipe the memory away. Others pretend it to be a love bite. Whatever works. And how do you do it? I wondered if he could use hypnotism. That would be a little scary. I'd never know when he would do it to me. I make them sleep, Britt, he said. Sarah? She can compel them with her mind. Like I said, she is strongly telepathic. Bob, he makes them feel like they're seriously hungover the next day. I took a moment to take in that information. Hungover? Making people sleep. That was pretty awesome. That reminded me that I wanted to ask him about the powers. You mentioned powers. What was that about? What kind of powers? It was quiet for a while again, but I could sense that he was thinking of how to reply. It was true. This link between our minds. It was so easy to hear him, even though he was a 10-minute drive away from me. As vampires age, they gain power. It works much the same as the immortality fusing with our cells, except that there is a blueprint in our bodies. One can only gain as much power and talents as one already had the blueprint for. Some vampires will always remain weak. Others gain strength and power rapidly. He was quiet again. I could tell that he was lying on his back on his bed, staring at the ceiling, but not really seeing it. What powers do you have? I asked when the silence stretched. Amusement came back to me. Many a gramo kroi. You'll find out over time, I groaned. That's not fair, Alexander. You said I could ask you anything. I said you could ask me anything. I never said I would answer them all. But even as he said those words, he continued with, at least you know I can put people to sleep. I also can light things on fire with a thought or a touch. Our talents are closely entwined with our personalities. I smiled. So that's how you lit all those candles last night? Very good, a gramo kroi. Alexander, Sarah told me about the marks. Will you explain? Silence. Then I could vaguely sense anger flare inside him, but it wasn't very clear, almost as if he was keeping me out. She wasn't supposed to tell you that, came his thought at last. Suddenly I felt mad about that. And why not? I have a right to know. Or were you just going to mark me without my consent? I didn't know exactly where that came from. Alexander had been nothing but gentle and all. Though he seemed to have a penchant for secrets, he'd told me what he was on our very first date. Alexander's reply sounded controlled and a little cold, but the words softened me. It was my right to tell you, Brittany. I wanted to give you time to get adjusted to what I am first. The mark is irreversible. I will not do that to you until you are absolutely sure. I instantly felt guilty about the harsh words I'd spoken to him. He'd only been looking out for me. It was obvious that it hurt him to think that I might not want him. He was good at hiding what he felt. I almost hadn't noticed through that thick layer of control. I'm sorry, Alexander. Sending him the strong feeling of belonging and love and wholeness I felt around him. I hoped it was enough to ensure him that I did not want to be without him. A giggle suddenly escaped my lips as I realized how far our relationship had suddenly progressed. We'd only had one date yet. This whole soulmate concept, we both knew we'd never love another. Never. Alexander sensed what I felt, and suddenly his amusement seeped through. His worries obviously eased. You are so human, a gramokroi. Before I could reply to that, Andy burst into my room. His face flushed, his bronze curls messy, and several colorful stains on his white shirt. It seemed he'd been allowed to paint today. "Brittany Lee, you're home," he squealed as he jumped up on my bed and dove into my arms. I laughed as I hugged my little brother. "Hey, giant, had fun today?" Then I sent Alexander. "I'm sorry, I need to spend some time with Hay. Let's finish this later." Andy went to close the door as he told about painting at school and the teacher getting mad at him because he'd made a mess. He looked a little too proud about that, so I knew he'd done it on purpose. Alexander touched my mind gently. "If it's okay with you, I'd like to watch for a moment. I've not had the chance yet to meet Andy." I nodded and then said back, "All right, how does that work?" "Just relax and open your mind. It's fine like this." A warm spot in my mind, and I knew he could see what I saw and hear what I heard. The rest of the evening I spent talking with Hay while Alexander listened in, although I knew that at some point he'd picked up a book to read. I read Andy's stories, and then we made up our own stories together. The next day was spent in a similar fashion, although during the day I was rather bored and lonely. Alexander had classes to teach and couldn't talk, and I didn't know how to reach Sarah or even if I would be able to. Andy was at school himself, but he was home at 2 again and stormed up to my room. I think the nanny was very relieved that I didn't mind spending time with him. She seemed hard-pressed to put up with all his antics. Alexander sent me a warm thought when he finished school, filled with longing that I felt reflected in myself. Already my body seemed on edge, strained like butter stretched too thin over toast. Andy seemed oblivious to the tension. Alexander shut me out just after 7 p.m. One final thought telling me not to worry and that he was going over to the next town to feed. I was sure he told me this deliberately to test if I was okay with it. He didn't want to strain me and scare me away, but he also wanted to show me clearly what he was, so I had the chance to decide whether or not I could live with that. He didn't realize that I had long since made that decision. Nothing he did or said could change my mind about it. Although I knew we didn't really have a choice either, I was sure the strain on my body would kill me if I couldn't be with him. I knew it was the same for him. Just before I fell asleep that night, my head filled with that lullaby. Alexander's voice softly singing it to me and guiding me into the warm embrace of sleep. The next morning, I was up and dressed, ready for school way before Jennifer was done. As she entered the kitchen and saw me, she quirked an eyebrow in question. It wasn't hard to pick up on the fact that I wanted very badly to go to school. Before she could get her own breakfast, she disappeared up the stairs again. I heard her call her mother. My heart sunk. She was going to get her mom to make me stay home again. I couldn't face another day alone, so I scrambled for the door, slinging my backpack over my shoulder. It was still early. If I hurried, I could walk and still be in time. Today was Friday, and I had the feeling that if I didn't see Alexander today, I wouldn't be able to all weekend. I had heard my stepmother say that father was coming home again today, and I knew he hadn't forgotten that I was grounded, even though I felt like he had no right to do that anymore. Since I was 18, according to him, it was his house, so his rules. I was halfway out the drive when Stephanie's scream froze me in my tracks. "Get back here, Brittany. You are not going to school when you might still be sick." To the neighbors, that might have made her sound like a concerned mother, but to me, it sounded like the wicked witch of the West. This had nothing to do with my health and everything with their plot against me seeing my friends and Alexander. Somehow Jennifer had guessed about my feelings for him and possibly his feelings for me too. I turned slowly, cast Stephanie one look and told her, "I want to go." "You can't stop me. I have a right to go to school." Then I turned and kept walking, only to stumble into something solid and warm. I went sprawling to the pavement, my bag tearing open and scattering my books across the curb. I yelped as the palms of my hands burned when I caught myself with them, tiny pebbles embedding themselves in the fragile skin and blood already welling where skin had been torn off. "Brittany Baker, didn't I tell you to obey your mother?" A stern voice thundered. My eyes found the shining black leather shoes, the immaculate suit in unrelieved black, the wide shoulders and the golden-rimmed glasses balanced on a firm, hooked nose, blue eyes glaring at me with such cold anger that I wondered why my blood wasn't freezing over. "Father," I said breathlessly, "I just want to go to school. I already missed 2 days because I was sick. I don't want to miss anymore." I didn't care that I sounded like a bookworm, or a nerd, as Jennifer would call it. He frowned and cast a look at Stephanie, who stood on the steps at the front door. She wore a green silk robe embroidered in flowers and birds, the fabric ending just above her knees, the robe falling open to reveal her ample cleavage. The woman was pouting at him, and his expression firmed as he turned back to look at me. "Get inside, Brittany, now." Anger rolled off him like a heavy fog, and I scrambled to my feet, gathering my books and my torn back in a rush. A savage kick to my side sent me sprawling across the pavement again. Dazed, I lay there for a moment, trying to figure out what had happened as pain blossomed across my side. My father had kicked me. I blinked as tears jumped to my eyes, and then there was a touch on my mind. "Britt, you're hurt, hang on. I'm coming for you." Alexander's presence in my head gave me strength. "No," I snapped at him. "I can handle this myself." I did not want him here. Not where Jennifer and Stephanie could see him. Not where he could get hurt, and not where he could see my sorry excuse of a father. I knew Alexander wouldn't be able to control himself. I felt him accept what I'd said, and then he sent back, "You will call me if it gets out of hand." The thought was nearly a snarl, and I could vividly see him clutching the steering wheel as he drove to school, his face twisted in anger. I had to hold back the thought that things had already gotten out offhand and struggled to my feet, clutching my bag to me as I stared at the man that somehow had the right to call himself my father. Alexander didn't withdraw his presence from my mind, leaving just the tiniest trace so that I knew he was there for me, so that I could draw strength from him. "Get inside the house, Brittany." My father snarled at me, but I knew he didn't sound as threatening as Alexander did when he wanted to. Still, my heart beat in my chest in fear and anger combined, and I didn't fight it as, with a sense of defeat, I walked back into the house. At 5:30, Stephanie and Jennifer came to my bedroom door. I had been locked in pretty much all day. I didn't mind that except for the crawling tension on my skin. Alexander had reached for me a few times more, always asking me if I wanted him to come and get me. I knew he could feel the throbbing in my side where a large bruise was spreading, vividly purple and blue. Stephanie was smiling with fake warmness as she sat down on the bed beside me. "Feeling better, honey?" Suspiciously, I eyed what Jennifer was holding, red cloth and a pair of heels. The girl herself wore a tiny black number with slits on either side till high up her thighs. It revealed the long length of her legs. "I felt fine this morning. I wanted to go to school," I told my stepmother with a glower in her direction. My palms. I rubbed gently over the rust fabric of my jeans. The damage to it hadn't been too bad, only the top layer of skin missing where I'd hit the pavement. "You had a fever," Stephanie said, and she reached her hand out to touch my forehead. "But it's gone now." Her voice was still sickly sweet, but there was a hard edge to her eyes. "My fever was gone yesterday." "I was perfectly fine this morning," I said as I stood up and out of reach. "Don't take that tone with me, young lady," Stephanie said, standing up herself and narrowing her eyes at me. Her sugary manners gone, she snapped a hand out, and Jennifer quickly placed the red cloth in it. "Put this on and those heels and get your hair and makeup done. We're all dining with clients of your father. Don't even think about misbehaving. If this deal falls through, your father will have your head." The red cloth was pressed into my hands roughly, and Jennifer tossed the heels down at my feet. The both of them spun on their own heels and stalked out the door with swaying hips. It was near identical, except that Jennifer wore a black dress, while Stephanie's was a more stylish blue. I hated to admit it, but they both dressed to kill. Their style a little too revealing for my taste, but they never looked tacky or cheap, simply deadly beautiful. With a shock, I realized that the pang in my chest was jealousy. Stupid. They were horrible people. I had no reason to be jealous. 20 minutes later, I found myself showered and dressed in a bright red dress, sporadically decorated with sparkling sequins. While it still showed off my figure and brought out the red in my hair, it was screaming and nothing like the sophisticated dark red dress I'd worn on my date with Alexander. Jennifer had stalked back into my room and was running a brush through my hair with harsh strokes. It felt like she wanted to yank all the hairs right off my scalp. It was hard trusting her with the makeup, but I forced myself to relax and let her do it. Struggling would probably only result in pain, and the whole ordeal would last much longer too. Besides, Jennifer knew what she was doing, and I didn't think she'd make me look bad. If that was what she wanted, I wouldn't be wearing this red dress, but something pink and frilly. But if they wanted me to look good, that couldn't mean much good either. Who was this client we were meeting tonight? A client that my father obviously wanted to impress very much. 6:30. I found myself following my so-called family into a fancy-looking restaurant. Andy wasn't present. Luckily, he'd been allowed to stay home with the nanny. that both worried me and made me feel relieved. Whatever it was they had in store for me tonight, they obviously thought Andy didn't need to see it. Inside the restaurant, a waiter brought us to a private dining room and took our coats from us. Shortly after we'd all taken seats, my father's client arrived with his family. The man was in his late 30s and so was his wife. The man wore a dark suit that looked expensive and had dark blonde hair, combed back neatly to reveal an austere-looking face. His wife was thin and tall, with flawless milky white skin and flowing black hair. She looked a little like I'd imagined Snow White to look, albeit a darker, more dangerous version. She wore a skin-following silver-gray dress that reached the floor and pooled around her ankles like quicksilver. As she walked, she seemed to almost glide. They were followed in by a young man, at the most 20 years old. He had the same dark blonde hair as his father, but the flawless pale skin of his mother. Dark, intelligent eyes looked around from above a straight nose and a cruelly smiling mouth. As my father introduced us, the boy didn't hide the fact that he was raking his eyes over both Jennifer and I with obvious interest. The man, I was told, was Carl Miller and his wife Amanda Miller. The boy was called Luke, and he held my hand longer than necessary. To my horror, my father had arranged the table seatings in such a way that he was right in between Jennifer and I. Jennifer didn't seem to mind the attention he gave her, because despite that he gave me cold chills with his creepy stare. He was still handsome. But I did not appreciate the hand creeping up my skirt every other minute during dinner. I kept slapping him away and once stomped on his toes really hard. It didn't seem to bother him as he smirked at me. Creeps seemed to like it even. I understood now why they dressed me up. I served as a distraction along with Jennifer to keep the son busy. If I pissed off this Luke, I was sure the deal would be off too. On top of that, Alexander had been keeping tabs on me, checking in mentally every 30 minutes or so to make sure I was still okay. It seemed like he didn't believe I would call for him when I needed help. Of course, his definition of when I needed said help was different from mine. Had he known Luke kept creeping his hand up my skirt, he'd have been here within 10 minutes to teach him a lesson I was sure I wouldn't want to see. I had to find a way to keep my emotions in check very quickly, or he'd know what was going on the next time he'd touch my mind with his. This mental connection thing was something I was certainly getting the hang of, but for now, it was still mostly a one-way street. I could talk to him if he was within my reach, but I didn't know if I reached him until he replied, and I could only sense what he was feeling when he allowed me to. I envisioned a wall made of iron around my mind, putting all my emotions behind it so they were hidden. Just in time too, because I had just finished the wall and slapped away Luke's hand again when I felt him reach out to me. How are things? It was clear that he was extremely worried and fed up with not being allowed to come and get me. He wanted very badly to be able to touch me in a very earthly fashion, instead of with his mind. It's fine. We're having dinner with a client of my father. I'd told you not to worry. I miss you, but I'll see you soon, okay? Now leave me alone. I need to concentrate. Silence met my thought, and although I didn't actually feel any of his emotions, I could guess that I had offended him. He didn't like it that I was shutting him out in the least. I love you, Alexander. I said, hoping that would make him feel better. I tried imbuing the thought with as much love as possible without opening a gaping hole in my iron wall. I slapped away Luke's hand again and shot him a glare, which he received with an arrogant smirk on his face. He kept staring at me for a minute or so, and I pretended not to notice. As I ate, I couldn't wait for this to be over. Yet this was only the first course, and I knew several more would follow. I love you too, agramokoa, more than anything. Be careful. Alexander's thought was a gentle caress that gave me shivers and made my heart clench. There was no trace of offense, just the sincerity of his words that had me near staggering. Luke's eyes snapped to mine as if he knew something had happened, and a little flustered about his piercing gaze. I stood up quickly. "Excuse me," I said as I hurried out of the room towards the bathroom. I could feel all eyes on me as I left. A look over my shoulder told me my father was glaring. He seemed to think I was being very impolite. Jennifer and Stephanie and even Mrs. Miller looked at me with speculative looks. But more unsettling was Luke. I could not name what was reflected in his eyes, but there seemed to be a challenge hidden in there. I took my time in the bathroom. Maybe they'd serve the next course by the time I got out. I hoped this dinner wouldn't last till deep in the night, because I wasn't sure how long I could keep with politely pushing Luke's hand away. I pretended to touch up on my makeup, but knew I couldn't stay away for more. Then 5 minutes, my father would definitely be mad at me if I did. As I stepped out into the corridor, I realized with a shiver that it was empty except for Luke. Bloody hell. Why did he have to follow me? Hello, Brittany. His voice was low and suave, and as he sauntered over to me, his movements possessed an even glide that looked nearly fluid. Ooh, arrogant. Luke, I said as I inclined my head just the slightest bit in acknowledgement. My skin was prickling, telling me to get the fuck away from here. Danger. He radiated danger as if he was a predator. I sidestepped him and started back towards the dining room, but a hand on my arm stopped me, his fingers warm. Not so fast, dear, the boy said. His voice had an edge to it that I hadn't noticed before. I don't like games, got it? So stop playing hard to get. You don't want to make me angry. My father is very powerful. I shivered, but I forced out a laugh. Your father doesn't scare me, Luke. Which was true. It was my own father that scared me. Very much. I was terrified of what he could do to Andy. You should be, he said as he trapped me between himself and a wall. His eyes were cold as he glared at me. It was obvious he wasn't used to this reaction at all. I pushed at his chest, having déjà vus with Fort in a similar position. Let me go, they're waiting for us. They can wait, he replied darkly. I could pinpoint the exact moment his mood changed. His dark eyes lightened but got more intense, the pupil widening. The moment that happened, he pressed his body hard against mine, one hand sliding into my hair to grip it tightly. He yanked my head sideways and attached his lips to the sensitive skin of my neck. Just a taste, a little taste, he murmured, teeth grazing over the skin, pointy teeth. Oh my God, he was a vampire. I have a mate, Luke, a very powerful mate, and he'll be seriously pissed off if you bite me, I said, trying to sound brave. Something I most definitely didn't feel right now. It was only because I'd locked my knees that they didn't shake. His body tensed and he moved his face so he could look me in the eye, his nostrils flaring as if he was trying to smell something. Liar, he hissed after a short moment, his fangs showing, which confirmed that he was a vampire indeed. You're not marked. I felt my stomach plummet and found myself wishing that I at least had the hickey to show him, but that had faded and was nearly gone. Not visible enough. You noticed before, I talked telepathically with him, I said, hoping he would believe me and not mistake it for a bluff. One thought is all it takes to call him. He can be here in 5 minutes flat. I let the knowledge that this was the truth bleed onto my face. My eyes narrowed and absolutely serious. He didn't need to know that it was still terrifying to be alone with him for 5 minutes. There was a lot he could still do. Apparently he wasn't as smart as he appeared because he narrowed his eyes and said, "You are lying. Besides your mates is no match for my father." I forced myself to laugh again, even though I had no clue whether or not Alexander would be a match for his father. You hide behind your father, too scared to fight yourself? My tone of voice sarcastic, but I knew he could hear my heart beating wildly in my chest. His hand in my hair yanked my head back harshly, his eyes spitting fire. I don't need to fight. Your sissy boy will take one look at my dad and run away with his tail between his legs. Without waiting any further, he buried his face in my neck, his fangs grazing the skin while his free hand roughly pressed my lower half against him. My spine arching painfully. The next course is served. Are you coming? At that exact moment, I could honestly say that I loved Jennifer very much. Her timing couldn't have been better. I shoved against Luke's chest hard and was shocked when he actually let go and stumbled back a little. I brought up my hand and slapped him hard across the face, on his cheek, a blazing hand mark flaring to life, while the rest of the skin around it looked pale. Don't ever do that without permission again. I'm very sure you'll run out of willing partners shortly. Then I stiffened my spine and strode past Jennifer, who stared at me with open-mouthed surprise. My hand was tingling from the impact to his face, but I felt very satisfied as I sat down in my chair at the table. I plastered a very polite smile to my face and greeted the Millers, nodding at my dad and then smiling at Stephanie. My father looked pleased for some reason. A minute or 3 later, Luke strode into the room, wiping the back of his hand across his mouth as if he'd just eaten. I felt nauseous as I thought about that. Was Jennifer all right? His cheek was markless again, and I wasn't surprised. Surely vampires had fast healing powers. Just then the girl strode into the room herself, smiling wickedly. My eyes scanned her throat and neck, and I drew in a relieved breath when I noted that she was unmarked. No matter how much I hated her, I didn't wish for her to be food for a vampire. As we all sat down and continued eating, I noted how all the Millers ate little, yet their plates appeared just as empty as that of my family. Every plate, however, had deep edges and artful double layers. I guess they served to hide the food. "So, your son seems to have taken a liking towards my daughter," I heard my father suddenly say. I could tell he nodded in my direction, and suddenly, Mr. Miller was looking at me intently, sizing me up in a way that I was sure didn't bode well for me. Just at that moment, Luke decided to stretch his arm and drape it across the back of my chair. I wanted to shrug it off, but a look at my father's face made me decide to grin and bear. I did, however, stomp on his foot again, with the heel of my shoe. He didn't even wince. Mr. Miller nodded slowly. "So it seems perhaps we can talk business now." A calculating smile on the man's face told me he knew I knew what he was, and that he knew the liking was not mutual. 2 more courses followed and then dessert, but I had lost all my appetite. I couldn't do anything about Luke's arm around my shoulders, and it felt disgusting to have him play with my hair and stroke the skin of my neck or throat. His other hand was also still occasionally trying to make its way up and under my skirt, but at least I could keep slapping that one away. At one point, he pinched my leg hard and painfully, as if to show me he did not appreciate the slaps. The hungry look in his eyes, combined with a knowing smirk, was seriously pissing me off, and I was half tempted to call for Alexander. But I was afraid that Luke's father really was very strong. I had no way to tell. I didn't want Alexander to get hurt. During dessert, Luke completely ignored Jennifer, and the fact that she really didn't seem to mind that was unsettling. Very unsettling. So when at last the deal was apparently made and we were all done eating, my father asked for the check and then paid. I was hurriedly getting into my coat so that I could hide from Luke's hungry stare. It felt good to hide all the exposed skin. Knowing my dad would scold me if I didn't say goodbye politely, I turned to shake Mrs. Miller her hand. "It was nice meeting you, Mrs. Miller. Good night." She looked utterly startled when I did that, and then my father's hand closed over my shoulder. "Brittany, weren't you listening?" His voice sounded more exasperated than anything, but he also seemed happy, gleefully so. I have no head for business, father. My apologies." I had to wrench the words from my mouth and fight down the bile that rose along with my pride. I had to behave now, or I would never be allowed to go over to the Clitton house tomorrow. "The Millers have offered to take you and Brittany. You are going home with them," my father said, and I immediately understood why he was so happy. He'd finally found a way to get rid of me. Luke's hand fell on my other shoulder, smiling at me to reveal all his teeth, all of them straight and white. The fangs hidden from sight. Shock coursed through me. My dad had just used me as a bargaining chip. I'd pretty much been sold to these complete strangers. And they were vampires too. Agramokroe. Something happened. Alexander's voice in my mind had never been so welcome as it was now, I think. "You need to come and get me," I thought as I swallowed convulsively and looked at my father's face in astonishment. I couldn't believe this was happening. My father was an asshole and he might have kicked me this morning, but he wouldn't sell his own daughter like this. "I'm already on my way. A run, hang on. Tell me what's going on." I could hear that he was angry. I didn't care. So was I. "There's 3 vampires. My dad doesn't know they are, though, and he wants me to go with them. I knew I had to warn him about that. He needed to take back up with him." "You can't send me with them," I said at last. Everyone had been staring at me as if they expected me to explode and throw a tantrum. I wasn't sure if I would or not. I didn't think it would help. But I needed time. Time for Alexander to get here. Who? The single thought was sharp and piercing, barely contained rage. "Yes, we can. They will give you a nice room, and you can pick up your stuff tomorrow. Mr. Miller even has a job for you for the weekends. It will pay for the rent." My father explained it to me patiently in the way you would talk to a child. Miller. The family. Miller. I shrugged out of Luke's grip and turned to face my father. "I'm 18. You can't do this to me. It's not legal." I glared at Luke openly. "Brittany, you are going," my father thundered. "I'm your father and you'll do as I say. This is what is best." Something snapped inside me and I found myself yelling, "No, you are not my father. A father wouldn't do this to his daughter." My fist clenched, and at the same time that the angry tears started pouring from my eyes, I felt the anger spark hotly inside me. My clenched fist flew up, and I hit my father square on his jaw. My hand hurt, but it was satisfying to see the split in his lip and the blood dripping down. Oh fuck. Blood. The moment I realized that, Luke's arms clamped around me, one hand twisting my head sideways brutally. Both the Millers in front of me snapped their jaws shut and moved to grab my father, who looked around him utterly bewildered. The only ones who didn't seem surprised were Stephanie and Jennifer. I could feel Luke's fangs on my skin, and he murmured, "I'll get to taste you after all, honey. I'm going to enjoy this very much. We're going to take good care of you at home." I had just a moment to see Mrs. Miller licking up the blood from my father's lip while Mr. Miller held him in a death grip. Stephanie behind them smiled, as if she loved the fact that the whole situation had escalated. Jennifer surprisingly looked a little worried, but one look at her mother and her expression started mirroring hers. Then pain shot through me. Hot, searing pain. It all started in my neck at two small burning points, and I heard a horrible sucking sound that echoed in my ears. My body trashed on its own accord, my legs kicking and my arms flailing against Luke's restraining arm. I was screaming too, and my vision seemed to narrow as black creeped in from the edges. A blur burst into the room, and I heard a snap, as if someone had snapped their fingers. It had a curious effect. Jennifer and Stephanie both fell to the floor like rag dolls, and when the Millers jumped back, my father followed the same fate. Luke stiffened behind me, and then the searing pain faded as he stopped his feeding. His body jerked as if he was hit by something, but I couldn't see what. And then I was collapsing to my knees, my ears ringing as an unseen force pressed against me, battering my senses. My legs